Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, and I am glad that all of you could be with me on this morning. What is today? Today is Thursday morning, show number 87. Wow, we are nearly at 100 episodes. Just think about that. Nearly 100 episodes together, doing the news. Mono, womano, or whatever else. I'm not all that picky, nor will I make a designation. But I am glad that you guys are here with me this morning. It is an early morning. There's a lot of stuff that took place last night, including my mom hit me up and pointed out that there was a crash, a Black Hawk helicopter. See if I can find a clip for this. A Black Hawk helicopter ran into an airplane and crashed. So right here. So this is a clip of this. Just astonishing. I don't even know how this happens. This was in DC. I was about to say where I live. I no longer live in DC. And so this is some of the footage for this. Now, I haven't seen the Black Hawk itself run into it, or at the very least, this is what they're showing when I click on it. Oh, there it is. Let's see this. Let's see this one more time. So you can see it in the background where it looks like it just tumbles out of the sky. Back there. That is astonishing. That is astonishing. I have no idea how that happens. I legit don't. Like, how is your avionics, your air traffic controller, how is that so screwed up that you end up in a crash like that? That is astonishing. That is completely astonishing. I don't have anything to say about that. It's just shocking that something like that would take place. That's all. Also yesterday, RFK. So RFK was going through his committee hearings, effectively trying to get approved. On top of him trying to get approved, Nicole Shanahan was the one that was his VP candidate when he was running for office. Shanahan comes out and levels this threat, in fact, literally saying anybody that does not back RFK for this, they will be primary. Basically, that she's going to put her billions of dollars behind taking them out of office. Now, some people are saying, damn right. Some people are saying, damn right. Other people are saying, well, wait a minute, this is not the way this is supposed to work. Like, the notion, we have gotten so accustomed to billionaires getting involved in our politics that it seems almost normal for them to come out the woodwork and now level threats at our political space, effectively saying, if you don't do this, we will compel you with cash. And you would think that the political space will look at this and say to themselves, maybe we don't like this. Meaning, if we're supposed to, philosophically speaking, ethically speaking, represent the best interests of the public, however we see it, meaning when we are looking out and we're trying to figure out what do we do from the standpoint of public policy, what does it say if somebody could spend, let's say like APAC, $100 million, or Shanahan, how many ever millions that she's going to spend, in order to go after somebody, in order to make a threat to force them to do X or to force them to do Y. Now, some people could say money is speech, and because money is speech, you have every right to do that. I'm just saying it's very weird to me that an individual person who just so happens to have a lot of money can grab the reins of our political space and contort it one way or the other for their own whims, because that's what it is. It's their own whims. Now, I get it. Some people may be okay with this because it's, RFK and it's their guy. And if I'm being bluntly honest with you, I've said before that I actually want RFK confirmed in the spot. We need to do something different. And, when you look at somebody who was a corporate lawyer who was a lawyer going after various corporations for malfeasance. I like the fact that all of these companies are terrified of him. I like the fact that he seems to be earnest about going after this thing about public safety, food health, and those type of things. And I like the fact that he seems to be serious about coming up with ways to increase the human lifespan, and at the very least articulates the lifespan is less than our European associates. And that is ghastly. Why is that the case? Now, at the same token, when Sanders asked him yesterday whether he was for Medicare for all, and he said healthcare is not a human right. Okay, well, that's problematic. I don't see how you can have it both ways. Now, he did bring up an interesting point, effectively saying, well, what about somebody who smokes for 20, 30 years of their life? Should they also get health care? Yes. Yes, they should also get health care. Yes, as a public safety issue, we want people to live better lives. That is true. By the same token, we make smoking legal. We make this stuff legal. How are we now saying, yeah, we're going to make it legal? It's perfectly okay to do this. The federal government is even going to back some of this stuff. However, if you partake of the thing to which we define as legal, you are what? Not going to get health care? You're not going to get Medicare? What is it that you propose for this particular process? Yeah, if you're an American, you should get health care. Full stop. And I get that healthcare has a cost associated with it, but all sorts of things that the government does has a cost associated with it. Military has a cost associated with it. Doesn't necessarily mean that, the government doesn't have a federal obligation to protect its borders and its sovereignty. What's the difference with healthcare? Why can't we do the same thing for healthcare that we do for military? If we say, well, we have a philosophical responsibility, ethical, legal responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of the population. Okay, fair enough. So can we do the exact same thing with healthcare? Well, apparently, RFK wouldn't necessarily go that far, even though lowering drug costs and those type of things, he did seem to agree with. So that, at the very least, is a good thing. I have no expectation that I'm going to get everything I want out of this, but it is fascinating. I mean, look at this. When is the last time you saw a committee hearing with this big of a crowd?
We are hopeful that we will get into the room.
Look at that. How many committee hearings have you seen where that many people came out of the woodwork to push for the guy to win it? That's astonishing. That is an astonishing thing. So yeah, I've said it before. I didn't stutter on this. This was one of those situations where I actually did want RFK to get in on this. And look, it's few and far between in regards to, I think, what I'm going to like. But at the very least, RFK is a quirk in the system that is a bit different than what we've had up to this point. Another thing, we're going to have a big show today. We have Scott Ritter coming on at 7:15. We have Peter Coffin coming on at 8:15. We have Ted Rawl coming on for 15 minutes to talk about Mayor Adams. So apparently the Justice Department is in conversation with Mayor Adams about dropping his case. That is fascinating to me. Because Adams' main point was saying the federal government was after me. Adams seemed to be very conciliatory, to put it mildly, to Donald Trump. And that conciliation, if that's the word or the correct conjugation, seems like it may actually pay off. So there's that. Senator Menendez, 11 years in prison. Senator Menendez got 11 years in prison. Now, Menendez came out and said it is a political witch hunt. They were after me. They were after me. This is unfair. And we are going to petition for all sorts of legal remedies associated with this, all sorts of appeals. We'll see. Now, if you think of it, there have been few political people in Virginia. What is it? What is the guy's name? McDonald. McDonald was the governor of Virginia when I was living in Virginia the first time around. McDonald gets pinched. He throws his wife under the bus. He said she was messing around on him. She called him everything. He called her everything but a child of God. He was doing any and everything out of his power to get out of that case. McDonald loses, gets convicted. It goes to the Supreme Court, and McDonald gets let out from the Supreme Court. So where there's a will, there's a way. And I would imagine that is what Menendez is hoping for, that will and that way to become manifest. Another interesting story that is super bizarre, but Drop Zone is reporting it. So Donald Trump recently came out and said, we are sending $50 million in condoms to Gaza. And that is atrocious. That's outrageous. We don't want to be spending money like that. And so I am putting a stop on all of the condoms that we're sending to Gaza. Come to find out, that was a typo. It wasn't Gaza. It was something like in Gaza. And that was another part of Africa, not Hamas, in the sense of Palestine. What a goofball. Just what a goofball. Just utterly, completely ridiculous goofball. Now, what makes this even worse, Donald Trump came out and was saying stuff like Hamas used these condoms to fill them with bombs and to attack Israelis. It was nonsense. All of it was completely and entirely made up. At no point did it stop them from running with that nonsense. At no point did it stop him from running with that nonsense. I was trying to find the exact clip for this. So right here, Biden was writing off millions in taxpayer dollars to condoms for Gaza, the new White House press secretary reveals. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. I don't doubt that Biden was sending a bunch of money in that sense. I'm pointing out that they got it wrong. It was the wrong Gaza, which again brings into question what the hell he's doing with this kind of freeze. One of the other fascinating things that have taken place is that the Trump administration has offered buyouts. Let me see if I have that article. So they are offering buyouts, again, right here, buyouts to federal workers. So say, for example, if they say, hey, do you want to get let out your contract? And we will back you going all the way until September. At that point, our hands are done with you. But the buyout, the entire point is trying to shrink the government. And this is one of the ways they're talking about trying to do it. But my guest is here, the man himself, Scott Ritter. Can't get it out. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Welcome to the show, my man. How you doing this morning, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yourself?
I am doing good. Better that you are with me. I want to start in Ukraine. Before we start in Ukraine, it is Auschwitz commemoration ceremonies that have been taking place over the last week. And give me your take on this idea that, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's like 90% of every German that was killed on the Eastern Front. Give me your take on this revisionist history where these guys are acting as if Russia wasn't a part of this, or the Soviet Union wasn't a part of this. I mean, there were some articles that, I think it was Schultz that said something like, I want to thank America for liberating something. Basically, because they're now at odds with Russia, they're now ignoring this kind of great effort that was taken by the Red Army in liberating Germany, for one, but also changing the map of Europe from being Germany dominated to what it is now. Give me your thoughts on this. I don't want to stay too long on this one, but I definitely want to hit that before the start because I find it to be atrocious.
Well, first of all, let's understand. I don't think the number's 90% of German casualties. I think it's between 60 and 70%, but it's still the vast majority of German casualties. We know that Russia destroyed, 7 out of 10 German divisions. At the end of the war, the United States, of course, caught up. We had the big cauldrons in the Ruhr Valley where we surrounded a lot of Germans and stacked the statistics in our favor. But prior to that, it was even more one-sided for the Soviet army and the pain that they were inflicting on Nazi Germany. If it weren't for the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany would not have been defeated in the time frame that took place. I mean, it's hard to say what would happen had America fully mobilized its resources and in the war dragged on. I think the United States would have been able to overcome Nazi, but the war could have changed. The Germans were building missiles and bombers capable of hitting American shores. They were working on a nuclear weapons program that would have leveled the playing field there. The war ended because of the Soviet Union on the time frame that it did because of the Soviet Union, because of the enormous sacrifice that the Soviet people played. 27 million dead. And so what's happening now, though, is because we are politically arrayed against Russia. Part of the Russophobia that exists in the West, in the United States, is to play down the significance of the Russian contribution, because, of course, anything that glorifies Soviet military prowess would be seen as glorifying Russian military prowess, and we don't want to do that. One of the greatest shames that's going to take place is on the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany, which is going to take place in May 9th. The Russians will have a Victory Day. This is a big one. This is going to be a very big deal. It used to be that the Allies would send troops to march in that parade because the Russians have always said it was an Allied victory. Yes, they celebrate the role and the sacrifice of the Red Army, but they've always acknowledged that this was an Allied victory. And the Russians, there's no more pride for the Russians than having the Allies march alongside the Russians in celebration of this victory. But we continue to call May 9th a propaganda exercise. We say that it's just about the militarization of Russian society. This is, Putin, flexing muscles. And so we ignore May 9th. We ignore Victory Day, and we ignore the role that Russia played in defeating Nazi Germany. With all due respect to Schultz, don't thank the Americans and don't thank the Brits. Thank the Russians for freeing you from Nazi Germany, because had the Russians been defeated, or had the Russians not been as dominant as they were, the map of Germany would be completely different. And I just want to remind the Germans that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had a Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau, who had a plan to divide Germany up, to eradicate Germany, to turn it to deindustrialize Germany, to turn it into an agronomy only state that would have killed millions of Germans and eradicated Germany as a modern nation state. Yep. If the Russians had been beaten and the United States was forced to dig deeper, to bring more men out, to mobilize, and the pain was felt even greater by America, let's say pain somewhat equivalent to what the Soviets felt, our victory would have been totally different. We would have carved Germany up. We would have crushed Germany. We would have ground them into the dust of history. We would have made what the Romans did to Carthage pale by comparison. So Schultz, don't be thinking America so fast, because we are the ones that had the plan to erase you from the face of the earth. It was only because of the dominance of the Russian victory that we said, well, wait a minute, we might need Germany to be around to help us industrialize, to offset this manufactured threat we had from the Russians. But the Germans have to be very careful what they're doing here, and so does the rest of Europe. They owe the Soviet Union a huge debt of gratitude. They owe 27 million Soviet citizens a huge debt of gratitude. And instead of trying to rewrite history and erase the Russians away, I mean, what they're saying now, the liberation of Auschwitz, just to show you how ignorant these people are. They say they were liberated by Ukrainians. Well, I mean, yes, there may have been a Ukrainian officer here, a Ukrainian officer there, but wasn't it the first Ukrainian front that did it? That's a Ukraine. You guys do know that the Soviet fronts were geographically designated, not by, who was in control, Ukrainian troops. It was that the first Ukrainian front was fighting against the Nazis in Ukraine and advancing, and then they entered into Poland. But it wasn't a Ukrainian army led by Ukrainian officers. It was a Soviet army, primarily Russian army, led by Russian officers, just named the Ukrainian front. But these revisionists, it just shows the depth of ignorance that they have. But this is a travesty, and I have to tell you, having been to Russia, this hurts. I mean, this is something they take personally. They can take most affronts, they can take the insults, they can take the stupidity. But when we come in and we besmirch the honor of the Red Army and the victory that was achieved by the Red Army over Nazi Germany, the Russians take that personal. And again, I keep saying, I'll leave it on this, the best move Donald Trump could make right now in resolving U.S.-Russian conflict, the best move would be to say, hey, Vladimir Putin, I would like to send a delegation to Moscow on May 9th. I won't be in it, but I'll send a high-level delegation, and I'd like American troops to march in the parade and send a contingent of 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne Division, the Big Red One, some of the divisions that fought so well during World War II. Send the units that met with the Soviets at Torgau on the Elbe River, and have them march, and have some of them march in World War II uniforms. And if you want to repair relations between the United States and Russia, you instantly repaired relations between the United States and Russia. The Russians will look upon that, and while they won't forget everything we did to them, they'll forgive just about anything if we show that kind of gratitude and show that kind of awareness. Right now we don't, and the Russians are perturbed by it and even angered by it. Donald Trump could solve almost every problem we have with the Russians just by that simple act.
Look, I agree with you. The lift that it took in order to beat the Nazis in that war, that's not something we should forget as a world, especially since all of us were able to come together in order to do that as a country, as a world. No, man, I agree with you 1,000%. Speaking of that, speaking of this notion of trying to mend fences and everything else, a report came out, I believe this was a couple of days ago in The Economist, and it pointed out that forces of Ukraine, it says, are, quote, consistently understaffed, under pressure, and cracking. It says, quote, we no longer have tactics beyond plugging holes. We throw battalions into the chaotic mess and hope we can somehow stop the grind. This was a Ukrainian commander who went by Kupol, told The Economist. Why hasn't Trump contacted Putin? Like, meaning he could pick up the phone call. I mean, he could pick up the phone and call Putin now. Initially, Trump said he wasn't going to do it because he wasn't president yet, and he didn't want to Bigfoot Joe Biden. Okay, fair enough. He is now president. Why no phone call?
Well, I mean, now you're asking me to get into the mind of Donald Trump, and an army of psychologists have been trying to do that for years, and I am not going to pretend that I have the ability to do that. I will look at it from an analytical standpoint. I think Donald Trump knows that this phone call between him and Putin, the first phone call, will be an extremely important phone call, and one that will set the tone and the pace for future relations. Again, I come back to the best phone call Donald Trump could make would be to call up Vladimir Putin just to say hi and say, look, we got a lot of issues we need to talk about right now. And I got my team working on it, got your team working on it. We're going to have another phone call, Mr. President. But I just wanted to reach out and say, we are seriously on the path of restoring normalized relations with you. And I know you're getting ready for the big May Day parade. I want to send JD Vance and a delegation to Moscow there, not for treaty signing, not for anything, just to attend the May Day celebrations. And I'd like to send an American contingent. Here's my guy. Can you give me a designation? We can have my guy talk to your guy and we can make this happen. Just get the ball rolling on that, because this is a big deal, 80th year. I think it would be a good, symbol of American-Russian, the restoration of American-Russian friendship. Then you and I can work out the details later. This is a complicated problem and we're not going to solve it today, but I'd like to get that going, then hang up the phone. Victory, victory, victory. You know how Donald Trump keeps talking about winning? He just won. Because now Putin's going to hang up the phone. He's going to turn to the guy and go, make that happen. Then he's going to turn to his people and say, all right, this next phone call, let's build on this. Let's build on this gesture here. And that gives Trump to come up with a policy that's going to work. One of the reasons why Trump doesn't make that phone call right now is that, he was hoping that he had a plan that would resonate in Russia. I mean, he was told the Russians are losing. He was told the Russians are taking casualties. He was told this whole thing. And it's now becoming apparent to him that none of that was true. The Russians aren't losing. They're winning. The casualties aren't anywhere what Keith Kellogg says they are. It's a far worse situation for the Ukrainians. And here's the other thing. The Ukrainians are collapsing right now. A negotiation is going to take months, 4 to 6 months to work this thing out. And Trump is a businessman. You don't enter a negotiation until you have all your ducks in order, but if I'm coming in and my strongest position is on day one and I'm trying to come in and make some demands and we say, okay, we'll meet tomorrow. I come in tomorrow, but the Russians have advanced and taken 2 more cities and the Ukrainians and they're collapsing and their economy is, and I'm trying to make demands. The other side's going to go, well, wait a minute. We got to reassess here. We're not going to give up this, that, and the other thing because we already own it. Why give up something that we own already? And oh, by the way, we're not so keen on the rushed pace here. In fact, if we wait another week, we're going to own almost everything else. I think Trump understands he has no negotiating hand right now. One of the things that he appears to be doing is hastening the collapse of Ukraine. Politically, it's very difficult for Donald Trump to dictate to Ukraine that you must surrender. So they make the pretense that, Zelensky's large and in charge, that the Ukrainians are going to be at the table, that they have a vote, nothing happens in Ukraine without Ukraine, But they just shut off foreign aid. Now, it's not military aid, but it's foreign aid. Right. Ukraine's collapsing. The Ukrainian government right now is panic calling the European Union saying, we need lots of money right now or we can't pay salaries. We can't do anything. Our whole society collapses. All of the Ukrainian propaganda machine, all the independent media and everything, they were funded 100% by the United States, and they're all going bankrupt. They're all unemployed right now. I'm crying for them. But the point is that's Ukrainian society collapsing. So the other thing Trump knows is it would be better for him to call Putin when Ukraine has called up the United States and say, do whatever you have to do to make this war stop, but it's over. We're dying right now. We're not making any demands. Just make it end, make it end, make it end. And then he can call Putin and say, yeah, they're ready to make it in. Let's bring this thing to a close. Boom. But I think Trump understands that the more he waits, the stronger the position he has becomes, because the reality of Ukraine's defeat and the reality of the Russian victory becomes so apparent to everybody that it softens the political blow that he's going to face when Russia wins this war. This is not going to be an easy thing for Trump to sell to Congress, to the American people, to the world. He has to be careful not being seen as a compliant tool of Vladimir Putin. Right. And one way you do that is to make sure that the reality of the Russian victory, the inevitability of the Russian victory is so absolute that you can't be blamed for it. And then what he'll do is he'll say, it's Joe Biden's fault. Joe Biden is the one who started this war. Joe Biden's the one that got it. My job is just to get us out of this thing, which is he's trying to do. But he was trying to do it in a clever way where he would impose his will on Russia. Russia's going to impose its will on the world when it comes to Ukraine. And it's up to Donald Trump to mitigate the political consequences of that. And again, I just keep saying, why not let the Russians help you? You know that scene from Jerry Maguire, help me, help you. This is really what, Putin should be telling Trump, help me help you. Okay, I'm going to get everything out. Show me the money. We're going to show you the money, baby. We've won this war. But now we're going to wrap it up in a way that looks good for everybody. And again, the way you do that is to engender goodwill. And the way you engender goodwill is to have American troops marching in the May 9th parade and have a high-level delegation, J.D. Vance, a former Marine, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, in attendance there, celebrating not Russian victory over Ukraine, but an Allied victory over Nazi Germany.
1,000% agree with you. I agree with everything that you just said. And you're right. When you think about it in those terms, there is... Joe Biden has spent the last 3 years whipping up Europe, whipping up Ukraine, and whipping up, let's say, the U.S. political instrument to be in regard in this war. We're with you for as long as it takes, et cetera, et cetera. It'd be weird to kind of stop on a dime. And it does seem like he's kind of letting them linger and languish. I would imagine Trump is getting the same stories like the one that was out The Economist. We no longer have the tactics beyond plugging holes. We throw battalions into the chaotic mess, and we hope that they could somehow stop the grind. And this is after Budanov came out, effectively said by the summer, Ukraine may not exist.
Well, remember, Budanov's the guy that was saying that we're going to win. We're winning. Yep. We're beating the Russians. It's all propaganda, Russian propaganda. And here's the thing. Under Joe Biden, the Department of Defense and the CIA weren't allowed to dig deep into Ukrainian lies because they recognized that what's going on here is a propaganda war. That what needed to happen is that the American people and the population of Europe had to believe in the inevitability of an Allied victory over Russia. In order to do that, you couldn't tell the truth about what's going on in the battlefield. That's why my trips to Russia, my conversations with Russians were seen as one of the greatest threats to the United States of America, because the truth, you can't have that truth told. And so they were told not to dig deep. So the numbers that were being briefed to Biden and American decision makers were the numbers fed to us by the Ukrainians. And we were told to accept that our narrative had to align with the Ukrainian narrative. That had to be the case. And even when we deviated from it, we did so only using intelligence sources, propaganda sources that maximized the bad news for Russia and minimized the bad news for Ukraine. We weren't allowed to go public with this stuff. Wasn't allowed to be part of our official policy making. Trump is still getting the residual. I mean, Keith Kellogg is a byproduct of that. You know, his number one advisor is a man who only receives misinformation, disinformation from pro-Ukrainian sources. And so Trump has been fed that. Tulsi Gabbard is about to go through a confirmation process. And it looks like there are the votes to do that. Yeah. And this is why the establishment fears her, because she's going to come in and the first thing she's going to say is, knock off this propaganda BS. I need the hard facts. And suddenly it's not going to be reporters from The Economist that are saying, positions that used to be held by 30 men are now being held by 6 men. There's no rotation and those men are doomed to die. Their only chance is to surrender or else they die. No one's coming for them. And that's happening along the entire front. She'll come to the president and she'll say, Mr. President, the situation is far worse than you could possibly imagine. You've been lied to this entire time. This is the truth of what's happening on the battlefield. These are the communications intercepts of Russian commanders that we've not been allowed to process because of previous orders. But as you see, the Russians are in total control of the battlefield. Here's the intercepts of the Ukrainians that we weren't allowed to collect because they were our allies and we weren't supposed to collect against them. But look at the panic, look at the disarray. The Ukrainians have been feeding us nonsense. This is the truth. Mr. President, if this war goes on, every day that goes on, the scope and scale of the Russian victory is going to be magnified even greater. We need to bring the war to an end now, even if it's cast as a Russian victory, because next week, the Russian victory will be even greater, and the week after that, even greater. We need to mitigate against the size of the Russian victory, and whatever leverage we might retain on the negotiating table, we only have it if the Ukrainians are seen as capable of putting up some resistance. If we wait much longer, they will collapse, and the Russians won't need us at the negotiating table. That would be a hell of a briefing, and it's a briefing that only Tulsi Gabbard can provide Donald Trump, because the U.S. intelligence community is incapable of providing that kind of briefing today because of the politicized nature of collection regarding Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. So hopefully once the president starts getting the good stuff, he'll have, I think he should either push Keith Kellogg to the side and minimize his participation or fire him. Just straight up saying Keith Kellogg lied to me, misled me, he's fired. And we were appointing somebody new to be the envoy. I don't know, Scott Ritter. I'm joking. But the point is, get somebody who knows Russia, knows the issue, understands the problems, and is strongly pro-American, an American patriot that's looking out for what's best for the United States.
Right.
But this isn't a zero-sum game. What's best for the United States doesn't have to be bad for Russia. In this situation, what's best for the United States is more than likely what's best for Russia. That there's a confluence of strategic direction here and such. But we have to be honest with ourselves. And right now, there's no honesty in Washington, D.C. about Russia, about Ukraine, and about this conflict.
Yeah. No, fair point. What does it look like? What does a collapse look like? You pointed out that the longer this goes, the worse it gets. And if you have the situation where Ukraine collapses, the way that they're talking about the battlefield, hell, if you go what Bodanov is saying, he is effectively saying we could cease to exist as a country. If the military does collapse, let's say Russia hits the last defensive line, or let's say the desertions get to the point where they lose military effectiveness, what happens materially on the ground? I guess I don't have a good framing of my mind of what that looks like. Is it they force elections? Is it they occupy, the territory? Like, what does that look like materially on the ground if the Ukrainian military just fundamentally collapses on the battlefield?
Well, first of all, remember we're talking about an awful lot of troops here. We know what collapse looks like. We've historically we've seen collapse. Look at what happened to the Germans on the Eastern Front in the summer of 1944. What the Russians call Operation Bagration, what the Germans in the West have called the collapse of Army Group Center. Collapse is just that, the inability to maintain a cohesive front, where you are, even if you're in retreat, you have control over the situation. You're able to counterattack here, punch back, and collapse is where there is no cohesion, where units stop linking into their left and their right, and the men stop functioning as a unit and start functioning as individuals and running for their lives, where all command and control has been eliminated. Whatever resistance is taking place is the resistance of desperate men fighting as individuals or as clusters, but not as part of a coordinated effort. That's what collapse looks like. We saw it on the Western Front. The Germans, near the end of the war, collapsed against the United States and the British, and we were making huge advances. I want to remind people, though, that collapse doesn't mean the end of resistance. In fact, a military in collapse oftentimes is more lethal in the short term than a military that has, cohesion. One of the reasons is that if I have cohesion, I'll retreat from a position. I'll say, oh my gosh, I can't hold this position much longer. So, hey boss, I need to pull back. He coordinates with the other units. They fall back, provide cover. I fall back into a new defensive position, and we delay the enemy's response. There's cohesion there. I lost some territory, but I maintain my force structure. A unit that it's in collapse, there's no coordination. They're running, then they get trapped, and the trapped animal fights the hardest. Yeah. The bloodiest month for Americans in World War II, the bloodiest month of all the fighting we did, of the fighting in Kasserine Pass, the fighting in Anzio, Salerno, D-Day, big battle. That wasn't the bloodiest month. June wasn't the bloodiest month for Americans. December 44, the Battle of the Bulge, huge defeat for us. Attacked big fights and all that stuff. That wasn't the bloodiest month for us. The bloodiest month for Americans was April 1945, the final full month of the war, when the Germans were in collapse, literal collapse, cohesion done, units withdrawing. Because every time we caught a German force, it became the Alamo. And they just turned around, they dug in, and they fought to the death. We lost more Americans in April 1945 against a defeated German army than we did in any other month of the war. That's what collapse looks like. Collapse is violent. Collapse is catastrophic. Collapse is apocalyptic. You're seeing death and destruction on a scope and scale that's unimaginable. Collapses entire units being run down, gunned down, mowed down. Collapses fields of dead bodies. That's what collapse looks like, and that's what's going to happen to the Ukrainians because they have no more combat cohesion. Again, positions that used to be held by 30 men, that would have rotations every 5 to 7 days. That means 30 men go into the front line, they dig in, they fight hard, and then in 5 or 6 days they're rotated out and a fresh unit's put in. What's happening right now is 6 men are sent in and abandoned.
Wow.
And you can't win a war this way. And that's where the Ukrainians are at. Those 6 men, they're going to have the Alamo. They're going to sit there and they're going to defend. They're going to make the Russians come in, surround it, assault it, blow it up, kill it, burn them out. If they're survivors, they'll surrender. If the Russians are in a mood, they'll take them prisoner. If not, they'll kill them. But that's the reality right now. The Ukrainians are not achieving any tactical victories on the battlefield. Everything that happens ends up in a Ukrainian tactical, operational, and strategic defeat. That's it. They're killing Russians, but not as many as people would like to think. These artificial numbers that Keith Kellogg has been whispering into Trump's ears are as fake as the day is long. It has no bearing on reality. And when Trump is briefed on the reality is today, right now on the battlefield, the Ukrainians are suffering 20-to-1 loss ratio. For every Russian they get, 20 Ukrainians are going down. And they already have a manpower problem. So this is going to get even worse for the Ukrainians. That's what collapse looks like. And now we're pairing that with, because again, Clausewitz, war is an extension of politics by other means. You can't look at the battlefield in isolation. It's about the political reality, the economic reality of Ukraine. Ukraine is in economic collapse. Their economy only functions because of the money that's invested by outsiders. Yeah. Who pays all the salaries? Ukraine makes no money. There is no tax base. There is no earnings. There's corruption. But the salaries, the pensions, everything's paid by American money and European money. The American money just stopped coming in. And the Ukrainians are saying, well, we can't pay anybody now. We don't have any money. They're turning to the Europeans, begging for tens of billions of dollars to come right now. And Europe's already stretched out. They don't have any more money. So you're also looking at the societal, political, and economic collapse of Ukraine taking place simultaneously. And this is, again, if I were advising Joe Biden, I would say the leverage that you have isn't on the battlefield. Russia will win the military aspects of this conflict. But the more cohesion that exists in Ukraine prior to the surrender, the more likely it is we're going to have some influence on what post-conflict Ukraine looks like. That's where we have some leverage. But if you wait and hit the total collapse of Ukraine, see, right now, Putin's ready to accept. And if I were Trump, I'd do this. I'd say, when I come in, yeah, Mr. President, yep, yeah. Zelensky, no, he's gone. We actually just, the CIA assassinated him this morning, or whatever we want to say. He died in a car accident, or he's on a permanent vacation in Miami. Look, you can joke about it. That's what we did to South Vietnam.
Yeah.
President Diem got inconvenient. CIA killed him. It's what we do. It's what we do. And so we'll do that to Zelensky. But you call it and say Zelensky's not the issue. We've spoken to the speaker of the Ukrainian parliament, who has stepped in as interim president, and the speaker of the parliament is ready to sit down and talk about the terms of conflict termination. And the Russians will be, we can deal with that person. But now, you know what I just did there? I made the Ukrainian parliament part of Ukraine's political future.
Right.
I now have retained some of Ukraine's past political, cohesion into its future. But if you wait for political collapse, there won't be a parliament. And Russia will dictate 100% what the political construct of a post-conflict Ukraine will be. Now, me personally, I think that's the best idea. But as an American advising the president, who's looking for some sort of, victory here.
Yeah.
There it is, boss. I just gave you the best victory you're going to get. Empowering the Speaker of the Parliament. And right now, we need to pick the best speaker possible, the one that's going to, more closely adhere to what's ever left of American interests in Ukraine. Because, our military is going to be gone. The CIA is going to be gone. It's all going to be gone. We need to have some ability to influence Ukraine's political situation going forward. That's in America's interests. And you do that by creating the conditions of conflict termination where we have a say in who's running the parliament, and that person becomes, at least in interim fashion, the leader of Ukraine. That's the best we're going to get out of this. I mean, people are going, well, is that enough? Guys, that's all we're going to get. But right now, if we continue going, we're not even going to get that. So, yeah, I think Zelensky's history, I think, and if Ukraine's not careful, because the United States cut off this funding for 80 some odd days, we're less than a week into the funding termination. Ukraine's already in free fall.
Yeah, they are.
What Ukraine's going to look like in 3 months. So, and I think that might be, again, giving Trump the benefit of the doubt here, where I think that actually might be part of his strategy, which is to break Ukraine so that the United States isn't the one compelling Ukraine to step down and restructure. The United States is actually stepping in, saying, we got to preserve what's left from your defeat, which is Biden's defeat. I don't know. It's like reading tea leaves when you try to get into Donald Trump. Have you ever seen that movie in John Malkovich's Brain or something like that?
Yeah. Well, very bizarre movie. Yeah.
And, I think getting into Donald Trump's brain would be very bizarre. Yeah. They should make a remake of it.
Yeah. Last question on this HTS. So Al Jilani apparently put out that in order for Russia, they want compensation. They want compensation from the Russians. And they're saying, well, this compensation doesn't necessarily have to be entirely financial. It could be with investments and everything else. Piggyback to that, it seems that with the very least reports on the ground, that there's not much activity going on at the bases in Syria that were effectively run by the Russians. And piggyback onto that, sanctions are still in place from the standpoint of Europe and the United States against Syria, now with the notion of trying to get the Russians out of Syria. What's going on with this? Are the Russians going to remain in Syria? And what is this compensation that they're asking for?
Well, I mean, again, we're talking about Russian prerogatives. The Russians didn't get into Syria to occupy Syria.
Right. They were invited.
They went into Syria to save the regime of Bashar al-Assad. If Russia were to stay in Syria, it would be because Russia felt that it could turn its presence into a force of stability, to engender stability in Syria. Russia won't do that with a gun to its head. It's just not how Russia operates. So HTS has to be very careful here. And I think right now, there's some thought that they might even be trying to hold the residual Russian military presence in Syria hostage to demand, saying, we're not going to let you evacuate, or we're going to, you're not in control anymore. You remember that again, I always use movies, but that Tom Hanks movie where he was the ship captain and the Somali pirates came in, I am in command now. I mean, I think they're trying to play that role, but I remind HTS what happened to that man at the end of the movie. He wasn't in command, and all of his people were dead, and he was in prison. Don't mess with the Russians. It's just sound advice here. But I think my approach would be to approach the Russians and say, we need you to help us stabilize the region. You're a force of stability. You have the ability to interface with segments of the Syrian population that are hostile to us or are very leery of us. They trust you. And, there's some reconstruction that needs to be done, a lot of it because of the bombs you dropped on us. And we'd like you to take the lead in doing that. And if that's the case, then we welcome Russia's continued presence in Syria. We'd like to talk to you about force structure. We don't think you need the offensive strike power that you used to have because we're not at war with each other anymore. But we would like, your military police battalions, bring in those Chechens that you brought in before, the Muslims, they get along well with the people here. There's a strategy to be done here, but I think trying to strong arm Russia is the wrong approach. It will ultimately backfire.
Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, thank you, my man. Where can people find you, Scott?
ScottRitter.com is the easiest place to go, a one-stop shop. All my links to the things I'm doing are located there. My Substack, you can get to my Telegram page, and ScottRitter.com. And I'll just say this, I won't get too much specific, but there's some new and exciting projects coming out that'll be done on Telegram and done on X. And so if you guys are following me on Telegram or following my X, there'll be some interesting product coming down.
Can you preempt any of it? Give us a leak. Give us a leak. What's the?
Well, I mean, my X is at Real Scott Ritter. Follow me there, and then you'll see. And I'm also Scott Ritter on Telegram, and follow me there. And when the product is ready, you'll become aware of it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thanks, Scott, man. I appreciate this. You have a good one. Be safe.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
So when the product is ready, you all will find out. Fair enough. Always appreciate Scott. Definitely appreciate him. I was shocked by the HTS. Maybe shocked is not the right word for it. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Scott is right on this one. Like, I don't know if HTS or Jelani's goal is to strong arm the Russians. I don't know if it's that or if it's a certain level of desperation, and it may be a little bit of both. If you remember, part of the reason that Syria crumbled was because of the sanctions that were applied to Syria. They were biting, they were effectively eating into the country. On top of the sanctions, you also had the situation where the US was effectively stealing the oil revenue from Syria. So you're occupying wheat or the land for the wheat, you're stealing the oil, and you're passing on these sanctions that are effectively biting into the country itself. When the Syrian government collapsed, one of the first things that Erdogan came out with, because Erdogan is effectively running roughshod over this process, he comes out and says, well, now that Bashar al-Assad is gone, we should also get rid of the sanctions. Because what is the point of the sanctions now that Bashar al-Assad is gone? So, we need to get rid of the sanctions, we need to rebuild, we need to put in economic development, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he's saying this for obvious reasons. For all intents and purposes, Erdogan knows that part of the reason that the Syrian government collapsed and he wasn't necessarily able to withstand this kind of onslaught of the jihadis that the US, Turkey, Israel were effectively backing was because they couldn't afford to pay them the same thing that their jihadists themselves were being paid. It eats a government alive in this situation. It makes it that much more difficult to fight for the protection and the sovereignty of the country itself. That doesn't change with Jelani being in charge. That doesn't change. Meaning if you still have those sanctions and you still have these kind of biting sanctions coming from the US and from Europe, and they are still materially damaging the local population in Syria, the same mechanics are in place with the exception of the players being somewhat different. Erdogan knows that. And I would imagine Jelani knows that. And so if Europe is coming out saying, well, look, we are not, until you get rid of the Russians, our sanctions are going to remain in place. Okay, that wasn't the original purpose of the sanctions, but okay, whatever. What they know is that the same factors that were at play, that were cancerous for the Assad government, are the same factors at play for the Jelani government. They know it. And so they need, from their point of view, we need to get rid of these sanctions. In lieu of getting rid of these sanctions, at the very least, we need to get investment. And so their thinking is we can get investment from the Russians. They have military bases here. If they want to keep their military bases here, we should get compensation. That compensation could just be investment into making sure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, if we're not going to get it from the West, we need to get it from somewhere. And then the Russians are here. If they want to stay here, maybe we could get something out of it. Now, to Scott's point, I am unsure if they're going to tolerate, let's say, this framing of events. The Russians were invited in by Bashar al-Assad. So were the Iranians. They were invited in to protect the integrity of the state. The integrity of the state collapsed. Fair enough. But I don't get the sense that they want to be under Turkey's thumb or under Jelani's thumb in regards to these military bases. And like I said, the reporting that was coming out was showing that these bases were not overtly active. It seemed to be a bare minimum activity at the bases themselves. So it's unclear on how many people are even still at those bases. But either way, apparently the Russian delegation took this information and apparently are in talks. So we will see. We will see. But definitely shout out to Ritter, man. Always appreciate Ritter joining me. One of the other stories, I was mentioning this a little bit earlier. I'm going to hit it now because Peter Coffin is coming on and we're going to discuss it. Nicole Shanahan. So as I pointed out yesterday, RFK was given his hearing. Now, as I said, it is few and far between that I've ever seen a situation where a committee hearing gets this level of reception. All of these people are out there with the idea
People are all here.
of backing RFK. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. Add to that, right here, this is the other one. So Nicole Shanahan comes out because there's this question of whether or not RFK is going to be able to get through. He is somewhat of a lightning rod case. Democrats hate his guts. He used to be a Democrat. But that level of activity shows that there was an actual interest in RFK, meaning if they would have had an actual primary and an actual contest, who knows where he would have went in that contest. But put that to the side. Shanahan, dealing with the fact that this may be a difficult case to get over the finish line, she comes out and says, let's keep in mind, she's a billionaire. She comes out and says this.
Hey everyone, tomorrow is a pivotal moment in our nation's history. At 10 a.m. Eastern Time, RFK will sit in front of the Senate Finance Committee for his confirmation hearing to be our nation's next Secretary of Health and Human Services. I urge everyone to call their U.S. senators over the following days and demand they vote yes on Bobby's nomination. He is more than qualified. He's proven, principled, and prepared to lead. I'll share a list below of key senators. If they represent your state, they need to hear from you. If they don't, please call your own senator and ask them to vote yes. We need as many votes as we can get. So this hasn't been widely reported, but in 2020, I cut large checks to Chuck Schumer to help Democrats flip 2 Senate seats in Georgia from red to blue. The 2 candidates I helped elect, Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff, please know I will be watching your votes very closely. I will make it my personal mission that you lose your seats in the Senate if you vote against the future health of America's children. And more than that, I also want to say to Senators Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Bill Cassidy, Tom Tillis, James Lankford, Cory Booker, John Fetterman, Bernie Sanders, and Catherine Cortez Masto, this is a bipartisan message, and it comes directly from me. While Bobby may be willing to play nice, I won't. If you vote against him, I will personally fund challengers to primary you in your next election, and I will enlist hundreds of thousands to join me. Big Pharma and Big Ag have exploited us for far too long. It ends now. You're either on the side of transparency and accountability, or you are standing in the way. The choice is yours. Please choose wisely. Hey, everyone.
Transparency and accountability of a billionaire buying our political space. Like, that blows me away. Like, we have gotten to a weird spot in American politics where billionaires feel perfectly okay coming out saying, if you don't do this, I am going to fund a one man, one woman campaign to get you out of office. And look, I don't begrudge a person for having a political campaign to affect political will one way or the other. It is super creepy, though, that an individual powered purely by the cash that's in their wallet decides to spend gobs of money in order to get rid of somebody for some particular political agenda. That just seems to be outrageous to me. And again, I'm saying this is somebody who was perfectly fine with RFK getting that spot. And I've even said that I wanted him to get that spot for Health and Human Services. It is super bizarre. I don't like it when Musk decides I'm going to put $50 million into Donald Trump. I don't like it when Soros is putting millions of dollars into whatever random candidate he's putting money into. I don't like it at all. The Democratic Party, and for that matter, the Republican Party, but it's less of an issue with the Republican Party. There is a contradiction in the way that the Democratic Party functions, and that contradiction is cancerous. And if you look at today, I think it was CNN last poll, it was 30% of the public approved of the Democratic Party. 30%, that's it. 30%. You got a situation where the party that's supposed to represent the working class lost that working class vote. You have to ask why. You have to ask why. Well, like, what have they fundamentally lost that they used to have that is creating these outcomes where you get 30% of the population? Now, let's also keep in mind, 50% of the public just doesn't vote. So even when we're talking about X number of people, or we're talking about somebody losing a race, we're also talking about 150 million people that just weren't in the political process, that could have been brought into the political process were it something that they cared about and that dug into them. Well, that is not the situation to which we have at our disposal. For all intents and purposes, I would point out that there is a contradiction in a Democratic Party running as a lefty party, or as a party that's on the left, that's supposed to deal with the hard aspect of the capitalistic system. That party is also, that is supposed to be dealing with the capitalistic system, is working in line with that same system. Meaning, how are you running a campaign, let's say against the 1%, when you are also taking money from the 1%? How are you doing both? And I know I can hear a Democrat out there saying, now liberal, so what do you want us to do? Not take the money? What I want you to do is to destroy the system that allows that money to have that much control in the political process and to actually be against it. That's what I want. So, because to me, it makes no sense at all running in a political process where you are always at a disadvantage in that political process because of your ideological, or at the very least supposed ideological framing. If your ideological framing is we care about workers, we care about healthcare, we care about education, we want to expand the minimum wage, we want to increase healthcare benefits. Okay, if that's your political position, and that is where you say you find yourself on the political spectrum, then how are you taking money from groups, organizations, and people who don't care about those things at all, who don't want those things because they already have those things and they can afford those things? How are you functioning in a, let's say, full throttle sense when you're always handicapped by the fact that the people who you're getting money from don't want those things? I'm saying that it seems more right, or it makes more sense to go after, let's say, the political device that has created the process where you're always running uphill and always running at a disadvantage because there's so much money in the political process. Get the money out of the politics. Allow politics to be what politics are about, as opposed to being who is paying you for a particular political opinion or a political let's say, an ideological disposition. It's just insane to me. But my guest is here, the man himself, Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin, there we are. Peter Coffin is a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore a world where profit is the driving force and horseshoe theory is the other one. Horseshoe theory is the other one. How you doing, man? You doing all right this morning?
I'm good. I had wisdom teeth surgery on Monday, which is why this side of my face it's not the right size.
Oh, you're right. You're right. You're so right. It's weird. It looks like it's in an indent, but I realize it's not an indent. It's just the other side is swollen.
Oh, you should have seen it the other day, though.
Would you look like a woodchuck? Just sitting here with
I looked like I was storing away nuts for the winter.
But you're doing okay though. It's healing. I mean,
definitely. Yeah, I'm doing a lot better. I was the first day I couldn't even do anything, but I'm doing pretty good now.
Jeez, that's the hazard of talking for a living.
Yeah, you don't know when to do this stuff. It's like, should I do this now or should I? Because
it's like you got to talk at some point, and I talk for a living. Anytime your mouth is damaged, that's you not working. I was talking to the audience about Nicole Shanahan. So RFK has been going through his testimony hearings. And, as I was telling the audience, there's a huge amount of buzz associated with RFK being at those hearings. I sat here and watched those hearings for a good hour yesterday. Having seen the fight with him and Elizabeth Warren, seeing Bernie Sanders being a bit gruff, asking him, does he support is healthcare a human right? And he's like, a human right? I don't know. He was humming and hawing on whether or not it was a human right. Okay, but fair enough. They seem to have some level of agreement in regards to bringing down drug costs, effectively saying, well, yeah, you're right. We should be paying the same amount, or we should be paying more than what they're paying in Europe. Again, fair enough. Yeah. He may have a difficult way to go, though, especially among some of the Democrats. In fact, this is a clip of RFK. I think Brave put this one up. So shout out to Chief Nerd right here, just to give a clip of what we're referring to.
That's not good for farmers. We can now not export American food to Europe because the Europeans won't take our food. That's not good for farmers. We're also destroying our soil because some of the chemicals that farmers use destroy the microbiome, and that causes the erosion of the soil. You can't get water infiltration. Water pools up and it washes the soil off. Agronomists now estimate that we only have, if we continue doing these processes, only 60 harvests left before our soil is gone. Farmers are using.
Now, to be fair, he was shaky on some of the facts associated with some of the other items that came up. But all things being equal, fair enough, hearing. So Nicole Shanahan comes out and she says, look, I have given a lot of money to Democrats. I've given a lot of money to Republicans. And if he is not confirmed, all hell will break loose. I will use my billions of dollars to eviscerate your campaigns coming up. She said, Bobby is playing nice. I am not. This is Nicole Shanahan. This is astonishing to me that these billionaires have decided we are now going to come out of the woodwork and we are now going to assert ourselves. This is amazing.
In front of the Senate Finance Committee for his confirmation hearing to be our nation's next Secretary of Health and Human Services. I urge everyone to call their U.S. senators over the following days and demand they vote yes on Bobby's nomination. He is more than qualified. He's proven, principled, and prepared to lead. I'll share a list below of key off. Please know I will be watching your votes very closely. I will make it my personal mission that you lose your seats in the Senate if you vote against the future health of America's children. And more than that, I also want to say to Senators Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Bill Cassidy, Tom Tillis, James Lankford, Cory Booker, John Fetterman, Bernie Sanders, and Catherine Cortez Masto. This is a bipartisan message, and it comes directly from me. While Bobby may be willing to play nice, I won't. If you vote against him, I will personally fund challengers to primary you in your next election, and I will enlist hundreds of thousands to join me. Big Pharma and Big Ag have exploited us for far too long. It ends now. You're either on the side of transparency and accountability, or you are standing in the way. The choice.
I am astonished by that. Like, it's not so much like I told the audience before, I want RFK to be in that spot. So just biases to be open. But God, man, it is super creepy to me that a billionaire will come out and effectively say, I am going to change the political process, meaning I am going to put a huge amount of money into getting this person or that person taken out of office because of the vote that they made, that they didn't necessarily agree with a particular candidate. And so it's like, what, we're going to have these money arms races? I mean, I guess that's what we have now anyway, but that is not necessarily a positive thing for a political process to be so ensconced with cash that the ones who can scream the loudest, meaning the one with the most money, are the ones that's going to effectively run the roost. And just to make a clear point before I pass this over, APAC giving what, like $100 million. Elon Musk dropping like $50 million into Donald Trump's coffers or campaign. Bloomberg, when he ran, dropping $1 billion in a primary in his campaign. Like the amount of money that these people are effectively putting into that process. And then add to the fact that 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. So the person who can muscle the most money 90% of the time will be able to get their candidate across the finish line in, let's say, the House of Representatives or the Senate. Presidency is a little bit different. Give me your take on this. This is a disturbing new norm for me.
Well, I agree. I think my primary opinion is like these people, RFK is among people who have called out money in politics as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is my primary thing is that's very hypocritical. If you're going to, I mean, even though he's not doing it, she's doing it. She's like, Bobby's playing nice, I'm not. It's not necessarily, a completely different apparatus that is talking at the moment. It's just, it's something that it's hypocritical. And if you're going to want the trust of the American people, you can't do stuff like this. At least that's my opinion. I don't trust it, obviously. But on the other hand, I also think, well, what would I do if I had $1 billion? I would probably try to manipulate the political system so that people's lives were better because I know that's how it works.
Right.
So
right.
There's two sides to it. The first side is the one that I err towards. I'm not going to have $1 billion anytime soon. And a lot of the people who have $1 billion don't have it for good reason because they've been helping everybody out along the way. It's so, on the other hand, it's where I say if I had $1 billion, I would probably do the same thing. It would also be a very different set of conditions that would put $1 billion in my hands. I don't know why the hell I would have that kind of money.
Yeah, that's the other thing. My mom used to always say she didn't want to be rich. She just wanted to be well off. And I guess I feel the same way. I don't need to be rich. I don't need $50 million. I just want,
I agree.
When I want to take a trip, I want to be able to take a trip. I don't want to be hungry. I want to be able to live where I want to live. But that doesn't require me to be rich. Yeah, I guess I agree with you. I guess when you put it in those terms, it's like, well, yeah, if I had $1 billion, what would I use my $1 billion for? And would I use it to try to affect social change that I think is to the betterment of the nation?
And we know for a fact that's how change happens in this country. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, money does it. So, but also you and I can say that we're again not going to be people to come into $1 billion anytime soon. The conditions that get you $1 billion are not conditions we're sitting in,
That is very true. Unless somebody is just going to drop me a check for $1 billion from doing the show, not so much. Did you see, by the way, Menendez gets 11 years in prison? Did you see that?
I actually didn't see that.
So right here, Menendez, he was in trial over the corruption case. And I believe his wife was on trial with him, Nadine, I believe her name is. And so apparently the verdict came back. All these stupid pop-ups right here. Wow. Former U.S. Senator Bob Menendez getting 11 years in prison for taking bribes and acting as an agent of Egypt.
That should scare all of them. because I don't think that any of them aren't.
Well, he said it's a witch hunt. He said this is a witch hunt. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm completely innocent. And mind you, Menendez only escaped by the skin of his teeth. One of the other, the last time they had brought him up on corruption charges. Like, I think it was like a hung jury, and that was the only thing that got him out of going to jail, even in that case. And so apparently, just on the reporting, people were saying that his wife was somewhat of a bad influence. They thought his wife was the one that was making some of these connections. 11 years. 11 years. Menendez has been there forever.
I don't know. To me, it's like, I hear that and like, oh, they got Bob Menendez. It's like, well, what about Nancy Pelosi and all of her insider trading?
Yeah.
What about, all these obvious representatives of U.S. oil companies? What about, that's the stuff that when I see them get one guy, he's clearly done something other than that made them mad. Like, that's all I can figure, because there's so much corruption in the Senate and the House. These people are like, the representative from, and we talked about this either last time or the other time. I used to live in Berrien County, Michigan, and the representative from that district is Fred Upton from the Whirlpool company. Whirlpool HQ is in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and the representative of that district happens to be the heir to the Whirlpool fortune. It's like, okay.
Wow.
It's just like, it's so hard for me to take one of them being prosecuted seriously. If you prosecuted a big group of them, I would be like, okay, maybe they're actually going after corruption. But to me, it seems very selective in how they would do it. Because I could point out conflicts of interest in the guy who they keep voting in my hometown county,
Yeah, selective prosecution is not justice, or selective justice is not justice, I used to say.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, but yeah, our political system is so screwed up. But like, I give an example. Joe Biden, for example, the influence peddling thing. Joe Biden has been doing this long enough to know that, he's not going to sign his name on a contract. He's not going to write anything that's going to get him caught in any kind of overt sense. You're not going to find an email with Joe Biden saying, "Thank you for the bribe. I appreciate the money," that type of thing.
Oh, like Joe Biden uses email. I don't use the email, man. What's online? I don't use online.
It's like, what is that even? And yet he's making policy on these things. So Rudy Giuliani, to give an example of what I mean by this, Rudy Giuliani, John Kiriakou was trying to get a pardon. And by the way, John Kiriakou is doing a speaking engagement in Europe. I was actually trying to bring him in so he can have a conversation about the JFK files, but it's going to be a couple of weeks. But whatever. John Kiriakou was saying he was trying to get a pardon for Giuliani. Giuliani was selling pardons at one point, effectively saying, you can buy a pardon for me, have it in with Trump, give me money, and I'll give you the pardon. So they have a conversation with the lawyer. So him, his attorney, Giuliani, his attorney are sitting there, they're eating, they're talking. The pardon never comes up. And John effectively says, okay, well, what about the pardon? Giuliani gets up, goes to the bathroom, and his lawyer says, you don't talk to him about that, you talk to me about that. Now, this is insulation, right? It's like, you're not going to catch Giuliani with anything. Giuliani's been doing this long enough to know where that line is in regards to what is legal versus what's not, despite the fact that all of it is unethical. And so when Hunter Biden, and that was my biggest issue with the Hunter Biden stuff, it's like Joe Biden clearly knows that they're using his name for influence. Like when you have somebody send a letter saying, I'm sitting here with my father, and you either give me $20 million or else all of his political people are going to be very angry at you. Okay, well, nobody's scared about Hunter Biden like that. He doesn't have clout like that on its own. Sure. You may be scared about Joe Biden and Joe Biden's political associates if you feel that you're going to be locked out of some kind of political process or locked out of this ability to get something out of it. So I agree with you. I guess my point is I agree with that's a lot of wood chop to say I agree with you on this.
Well, there's a lot of instances of this. I mean, obviously the type of corruption is specific to this guy. There's going to be very specific evidence and conditions that go alongside how they prosecuted him. Like every case is going to be different. But on the other hand, how many cases are there if we really wanted to make cases out of everything? That's the question I have. I think about it, and like I said, I can tell you one right from my home county of Berrien County in Michigan. I can tell you, I can point to Nancy Pelosi and all the crazy insider trading. I think that's the most obvious of all of them because she made hundreds of millions of dollars at this point.
By the way, when DeepSeek came out, when that product came out, I think it was like $1 trillion evaporated from the NASDAQ, like up in smoke. Pelosi apparently had traded a bunch of stocks just before it came out. There's something inherently wrong with this. Like, I can't believe that they think it's okay for a Congress member who is looking and knowing what legislation is coming up, knowing what's coming over the horizon, and it's allowed to make trades knowing what's coming on the horizon. Like, it's
crazy.
clearly insider trading.
It's crazy too. And let's say it's somebody making trades on her behalf. It's still the same. It's the same thing.
Same
We know
difference.
that's the same. Like the instance that you gave with Rudy Giuliani, like legally is it Rudy Giuliani doing it? Probably not. It's probably his lawyer or some person in his apparatus. But I mean, it's them doing it. It's people doing their will, their bidding,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. It's so absurd, the idea. I didn't know about Nancy Pelosi trading off a bunch of stock before DeepSeek came out, but it's
Let me
of
find
course
that clip.
like it seems like of course.
It's just stunning. Like, I saw that and it was like, how is this okay? Like, and it's not like it's even a secret, right? It's like
No.
people know that Nancy Pelosi has a ton of money. They know that she made a ton of money trading stocks. Even AOC was in the situation saying, "This is outrageous. How are these people?"
She's on Jon Stewart the other day talking about it. I remember seeing a clip of it, and I was like, "Well, thanks AOC for saying the thing that we've been saying for years." But but I mean, it's nice to at least hear a sitting member of Congress say it, whether it's AOC or not. But I mean, how much money does AOC have? Like, the question is, are you saying that to keep people off your trail? I don't know.
Well, I think your point is corruption is all over the place, and
Yeah,
going
man.
after one guy feels not fair. Like, it feels like so inadequate. Oh, and by the way, even the situation with Mayor Adams. So, apparently Mayor Adams is in talks with the Trump administration on dropping the case against him. Now, Adams at the time was saying this is a witch hunt. Joe Biden is angry because I was going after him about the immigration stuff. I mean, all of these people talk about this stuff as being political witch hunts, despite the fact that this was a Democratic administration that was going after Menendez. And it was a Democratic administration going after, what's his name? Mayor Adams.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I agree with you. I would love, what we need in this country? We used to have this Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the CIA. And every so often, and again, I don't even know how to even pull this off, because the moment that somebody do anything on this front, they're going to say it's politically motivated. If a Republican do it, they're going to say a Democrat is, they're doing this to go after their political opponents on the other side. And if a Republican do it, they're going to say, well, they're going after Democrats. This is, this is clearly ideologically driven. And they will probably be right. But is that just necessary? Like, meaning, is it a situation where it may be necessary for one political party to have a witch hunt and then the other political party have a witch hunt? And I don't mean witch hunt in the sense of making stuff up. I mean, you're going after a corruption purely from this idea of we're going after corruption, full stop. Would that even work in our politics? I mean, we have effectively legalized bribery in our politics.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, because what you just said, I think there's a lot of this that is just straight up legal. Like, if you do it with one party removed, like we were talking about Giuliani, or we talk about the super PACs and corporations donating money to certain campaigns, as long as they don't coordinate. But they coordinate. Like, they have ways of coordinating. They dump a bunch of stock footage onto some website for you to not make commercials with or whatever. They coordinate. They know what they're doing.
I'm not saying you can use any of this for commercials. Wink, wink.
Yeah, and for some reason, there's just 13 hours of Ted Cruz stock footage out there.
Right.
I don't know why, but here's 13 hours of Ted Cruz doing campaigny looking stuff in a set.
Or you might have somebody like Newt Gingrich, where he's doing a commercial and he's like, "Yeah, we should talk about so and so." And you can imagine that the super PAC is listening to his interviews, and they're like, "Okay, so he wants to talk about so and so." Is that coordination? Yeah, of course it's coordination. Is it? Can you prove that? Not really. No.
It's coded at best.
Yeah.
I know it's. But they again, you said that we've essentially legalized corruption in that respect. Yeah. And, the problem with that is we do need some sort of truth and reconciliation. We do need to somehow reckon with this. How do we do that now? I think the real question is, how do we do a truth and how do we actually hold all of these people, regardless of partisan affiliation, accountable for this stuff? I don't know at this point, because they all have so much influence internally in the system. We've talked about the Twitter files, and we've talked about the influence the Biden administration had on various social media. Social media is so far removed from that. The fact that they had that much influence in it, you have to imagine the closer you get to the actual power, the more influence they have. When you think about it that way, it's actually kind of scary. It's like, how do you actually hold them accountable other than these, like you said, these partisan bickering? It does get these people motivated to suss out some corruption, but then it's very one-sided. We do need kind of maybe a battle royale witch hunt with all of them going at each other at once.
And that sounds horrible, right? I mean, I don't want this kind of overt political bias where they're trying to put the opposition party in prison because it's the opposition party while giving a pass to their own side. I don't want that nonsense. But it feels like that's the best you get. It's almost like you have to use one goblin to go after, a witch doctor or something. It's like I have to use one to go after the other one.
But then the problem is you get in bed with the goblins. That's probably one of besides the gay frogs. That's one of my favorite Alex Jones quotes.
But is there a way? I guess is there any way out of that? It seems like the political process forces that behavior. It forces me to, okay, I'm going to back this guy, even though, for example, Trump is a really good example. I want to end the war in Ukraine. All right. You have two political parties. Both political parties are effectively war parties. All right. Trump, with all of the negatives associated with him, says, I'll end the war. Okay, so now I'm in a weird position. I want to end the war, but he has all of these other negatives associated with it, and all of these things are a package deal. There's no way out of it where you can say, okay, I just want this one item. I just want the sausage biscuit without the eggs. You can't do that. You got to eat the egg with the sausage biscuit. And it's like, okay, there's no way out of that process. It's like you're stuck with this crappy, Daniel Lazare, his point was always, we need a new U.S. Constitution, that we need to effectively rip up the Constitution. It's too old, it's crickety, it doesn't work right, and we need to redo it in a way that makes more sense. And to his point, when you start off with a political process, it's like it has the mint smell to it. It's like a fresh new car. It's like, whoo, this car smells great. And everybody is trying to be honest, everybody's trying to be right. And then, 2-3 generations later, okay, well, they found ways to kind of, tweak the system a bit. They found loopholes. You have people who are less wed to the political ideals of it. And at that point, it's just more, and what can I get out of it? And then you go, 10 generations and we're here. I don't know how you unravel that. Well, what do you think about this idea of ripping up the Constitution and having this kind of constitutional convention? I don't trust that either, by the way.
Yeah, I don't. That to me sounds like a bad idea. I mean, I think that the Constitution isn't a fundamentally massively flawed document. I think that if you go at a very generalized level, you're not going to get a very different document than that if you're going to attempt to guarantee the things that it attempts to guarantee. Because the more specific you get, the less you can really, I think, talk about things on that on the level of like the basis of the country.
Yeah.
You couldn't get too specific, and therefore I think you would have a similar document one way or the other. I think the best thing to do, honestly, it makes me think of, there was a few years ago, Michigan, my home state, again, voted to attempt to fight gerrymandering by establishing an independent commission of citizens in the state who were, I think, voted on, and it did actually have an effect. I don't know that it made the entire state perfect or anything, but having an independent commission of citizens, as opposed to, I mean, obviously you can corrupt that, but there's probably some sort of, process you can put that through that does some sort of sorting out of varying embedded interests. But as far as I know, it actually did help. The Republican Party kind of firmly had a grip on a lot of various areas, and there's a couple of areas that the Democrats had a very firm grip on due to districting. And I do think that it was made more fair, if I remember right. I'm obviously going off of a couple of years. It's been a few years since I've lived in Michigan.
Yeah.
But if I remember right, it was at least somewhat successful. And I would think that maybe something more along those lines is just outsiders, people who are not in the political system, need to be somehow brought in for an accountability commission of some kind, maybe. I don't know. I feel like if we trust them with their own, like, how do we fix this? They're not gonna. Like, even if we did a constitutional thing where we started over with the Constitution, who's the people who are gonna remake the Constitution today? Is the people who, they're all corrupt, and we're talking about this because of these people. They would be the people that are in charge of that, and I wouldn't want that.
By the way, I used to make the same argument to Daniel. I was like, I know, but all of these people are corrupt. Like, all of these people, we're complaining. Because the truth of the matter is, I would ask him, I was like, well, what's the difference between the people who were living then, let's say in the 1700s, versus the people who are living now? Or hell, people in the 1800s or 1950s. Like, why is it just so happen to be now? I mean, the Constitution, for all intents and purposes, is effectively a similar document. I mean, it may not be exactly the same when you add amendments and everything else to it, but it's effectively the same document. It seems to be a person issue or people issue where they've gotten so accustomed to kind of soaking in this pool that they figured out all of the ways to make the process better and more corrupt, as opposed to kind of living up to their highest ideals. It's the incentives that are built into the process where they've gotten better at using. So, and maybe it's always running downhill. Maybe it's always the situation where the best thing that you could do is start off and have to keep redoing something over and over and over again. There's a story that I am fascinated by. Have you seen this? So Donald Trump came out and he keeps talking about the $50 million in condoms that were sitting in Gaza. Did you see this?
I have seen it.
So listen to, I want you to hear this, because there's a fantastic factoid associated with this that is mind-blowing. This is Trump talking about $50 million in condoms that were sent to Gaza that they apparently used to make bombs or something to that effect. This is Trump.
In that process, we identified and stopped $50 million being sent to Gaza to buy condoms for Hamas. 50 million. And you know what's happened to them? They've used them as a method of making bombs. How about that? In that process, we identified and stopped $50 million being sent to Gaza.
All right. So $50 million. Joe Biden was sending $50 million to Hamas. I'm sorry, $50 million in condoms. Condoms, no less.
How about that?
How about that? I love that, right? Come to find out that this wasn't exactly $50 million going to Gaza. It was going to Gaza and Mozambique, Africa, not Gaza, Palestine, not in the Middle East. Like, meaning this was in Africa. This was apparently, so right, it just so happened it was sent to the province of Gaza in Mozambique, the country located on southeast coast of Africa. Hamas, Gaza, Palestine did not receive $50 million worth of U.S. condoms from that grant, like Trump said earlier. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. And
Well,
keep
you
in
know
mind,
what that sounds like to me. It sounds like it sounds like something passed his desk and he saw the word Gaza on it. Which
he
is
ran with it.
It doesn't sound
Apparently, apparently there
that's
was
a
like a
Biden move right there.
That's a Trump move. That is a unique Trump move. Like that, I can't even think Joe Biden would have screwed something up. Like Joe Biden might have,
That's fair, yeah.
he would have made the mistake of saying it wrong. Agreed.
Yeah.
He would have butchered it horribly. It is a unique Trumpian thing to come out, get it wrong, and then lie on top of getting it wrong. Because it's not just they sent $50 million in condoms to Gaza. It's they sent $50 million in condoms to Gaza, and Hamas used them to make bombs.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, dude, how did Hamas use them to make bombs if it wasn't?
I don't know. It seems like what they do. We all know about Hamas. We know they like making bombs out of sugar. They must be able to do it out of condoms. I figure they do it out of condoms.
Oh, this is outrageous.
I just figured it, you know. What would you do with that many condoms? I know I would. It's too many.
I mean, Puffy had 1,000 containers of lube. What did he do with all that lube? You know, somebody made the point of saying they didn't even go through one bottle of lube. How did he go through 1,000?
Yeah. It was Dave Chappelle in his SNL monologue.
That's who it was.
He was like, I don't think I have ever in my entire life seen the end of a bottle of baby oil.
Yeah.
I've thrown
And he's
away
right.
a completely empty bottle of baby oil. And it's like, yeah, that's 100% true. I can't think of a time either.
I can't think of once where I've went through an entire bottle of baby oil, like just at all. And he has 1,000. And then, you know, what's so sad about it when the cops are like, make sure it's like 1,000 bottles. Yeah, we got to put that in the report.
Yeah, make sure we're accounting for the 1,000 bottles here. Each and every one. But then that does make you ask the question, like, you know, that's probably how he came up with the bombs thing. What are they doing with that many condoms? I can't even think of what they do with that many condoms, especially like if he thinks it's the other Gaza, he has to be like, well, what do they do there? Must be bombs.
See, when I first heard the story, I thought, okay, well, maybe Joe Biden is doing this because he's trying to keep the kid population down in Gaza. That was my first thought. That, okay, Joe Biden is working at the behest of Israel. They want to have at least as many kids as possible because, again, they want to take the territory. I mean, in my mind, it's a settler colonial stuff. To take that into they're using those condoms to make bombs is astonishing. And then even more so when you find out it's not even Hamas.
Wrong Gaza.
We got the wrong Gaza. We saw Gaza and we thought that one. I guess there's another one.
It's just bizarre, man.
I guess there's another Gaza. It's
like we didn't know there was another Gaza. There were two Gaza. Who would have known? Who would have known?
Yeah.
No, man. It's just
Did
bizarre.
you know there was another Gaza? I don't think you did.
No, I did not. But at the same token, though, I didn't have my press person coming out there saying,
yeah, exactly.
I didn't come out as president of the U.S. getting briefings, coming out saying $50 million in condoms. Just outrageous. Did you see this other story that 90% of Ukrainian media was getting? So one of the reports that come out talked about independent media. They use the term independent media is now suffering because they found out like 80 to 90% of the money that goes into independent media across the world is being paid by the U.S. government. And when Trump killed U.S. aid, then all of it hit the skids. I am fascinated with this. They're even saying the same thing in Ukraine. It's like you independent Ukrainian media, 90% of it was being paid by the U.S. government. And so there's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Is that really independent media?
No.
If 90% was being paid by the U.S. government?
Yeah, and they shut down Sputnik.
Yeah.
So that brings us back to another interesting line of conversation. Why is the U.S. allowed to have that much state media in other countries? Because that's clearly what it was. If we shut down the state funding of it and it shuts down all this quote unquote independent media, it brings us right back to that question.
I hate to interrupt, but the article said that they were independent media, Peter. Independent media. I mean, the article said they were independent media.
I guess, yeah, you're right. The article said it. And obviously, our press never lies.
You know what's wild about that? Because you have a damn good point on that. So me working at Sputnik, that is state media.
Yeah.
And if the Russian government is putting money into it, the US government putting in 90% of the revenue for the media organization gets called independent. That's outrageous.
That's the rule.
That's
for me,
outrageous.
but not for me.
That is outrageous. That's
It's
just
awful.
outrageous. And by the way, it's,
when you think about what those quote unquote, I mean, Sputnik, you could very easily, I mean, they've characterized it as attempting to influence things in the US. But as far as I've ever listened to it, it's always been folks like yourself and again, Malik, who is on the right wing of it, but also very skeptical of pretty much everybody across the spectrum.
yeah,
It's more along the side of that than it is like straight up like, oh, this is what Russia wants you to think.
exactly.
Whereas I guarantee you the quote unquote independent media in Ukraine is a lot like the same independent media in Ukraine 10 years ago, funded by George Soros, intended to cause a color revolution.
Agreed.
You know, it's that kind of independent media. And that's the thing, is a lot of people don't even think about all the Ukraine situation in the context of all of the money spent in order to cause erosion of trust in various types of government. Like there was they elected a sympathetic government
Good point.
or not a sympathetic, but just like somebody who wasn't hostile towards Russia in 2014. And so they spent all of this money like influencing the media there to get everybody against that thing. And then they had a certain, group of people who was rowdy and they were rioting. I mean, it was a peaceful revolution in the sense that it wasn't like an armed revolution, but it was riots and stuff. And I mean, that stuff there today is happening because of that stuff. And clearly we still have that going on.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that there's going to be a divergent point of view. I mean, and like I said, it was valid. I mean, it was 100 people got killed. You had these snipers that were shooting people. They didn't blaming it on the cops. It's just outrageous stuff. I think to your point, though, is the notion that this is independent is absurd.
Absolutely.
We here's the catch. I know people when you're working for a Russian media or something like that. I remember when I went in, my first thought was like, okay, I know what people say, but what's true? Like, meaning, am I going to be pushed? I mean, I had prepared early on, okay, if you get pushed, you can always leave. Because at that point, you're doing your show. If you need to bail, you can always just do your show. If worse comes to worse, I don't necessarily want to be in a situation where somebody is telling me to run one story or the other. Yeah. That is not the way it works. And shockingly, I would argue that we had far more freedom and something like that than at MSNBC. Like if you listen to like Cenk Uygur or you listen to Crystal Ball, and they talk about those stories, or even Ed Schultz about what it was like working on the MSNBC. They had a very specific line that they had to toe. And when you didn't toe that line, you were either going to lose your job or you were going to have the talk. That wasn't the way it worked for us. It seemed that what they wanted, it seems that they came to the assessment somewhere along the way that the U.S. is lying. And because the U.S. is lying, then what we need to do is just be straight with the story. So just give a straight story. Just give the context for the story. That's all you really need to do. You don't need to make it up. In fact, if you're making stuff up, it undercuts your credibility when you're doing the story. And so that was what we did. Our thing was they used to get pissed at us when we got a fact wrong or we got something off. More so than anything else, our job was get the story right. No more, no less.
I mean, the truth shall set you free, you know?
Yeah, but that's, I guarantee you, though, that is not what is coming out of Ukraine right now. This is not this notion of independent media. Like, just astonishing. Like, even to write that in an article saying 90% of the money is coming from the U.S. to independent media.
I mean, how many of the radio-free blankety blanks are out there that we know how they operate? They're just propaganda arms of the CIA in these various countries. Radio-free, blanket. It doesn't even matter what country you say. There's a radio-free something, radio-free Europe, radio-free, Asia, radio-free, blah, blah, blah. And that's, I mean, on record as being a CIA project.
I mean, the entire point of using like the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, was so they wouldn't have to be so overt with the CIA doing this stuff, that you can basically have these kind of color revolutions, these government pressure on various governments under this notion of aid, of NGOs doing the work that the CIA would have typically did in the past. And so that's what they use it for. And so when you're seeing Ukraine flip it out, oh my God, we're losing money because he put a stop on the US aid. I would wager to you, in whether it was in Georgia, whether it's in Romania, whether it's in Hungary, all of these groups on some level are probably getting money from US aid in order to affect changes and pressure against governments they don't necessarily like. And so we're just seeing this element of it taking place in Ukraine. I guarantee you it's going all across the world. Like, the amount of money that we spend on influence is astonishing. And it seems that when Donald Trump has come to the conclusion, why are we paying influence money? Why are we paying influence money? We could just tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, we'll just pass sanctions. We'll destroy their economy. So why are we giving honey in order to get the bees? We could just, forcibly, I don't have a good analogy for that. That's a horrible corner to go into. But basically, we don't have to be nice to them. They're our vassals.
Can smoke the bees instead of give them honey.
Thank you. We can smoke. Yeah, we can smoke the bees as opposed to give them honey. Thank you. I was trapped by the framing of the of the sentence structure. I couldn't get out. But now, man, it's fascinating. Like, and there's something disturbing about that. Like,
yeah,
I get it, right? When you're dealing with governments are going to want to influence other governments. Okay, fair enough. We make money out of thin air. And when making money out of thin air, we then use the money that we made out of thin air to influence other governments, even to the point of overthrowing those governments when we don't necessarily like what those governments are doing. It's just astonishing. No other government can really do that. Just outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of study on like the color revolutions and the Open Society Foundation, the National Endowment for Democracy.
Open Society is Soros, right?
Yeah, it's Soros. Yeah, it's Soros, and then there's NED and USAID are the three big things involved in that. I mean, there are other organizations that are smaller that are, but it's a wild bit of like the amount of influence that you can do so much of this with just media. If the media is coordinating, once you have a coordinating media, you can do so much to change reality. Like, to get back to what I'm always talking about, this is the reason why I've looked into that kind of stuff. But it's money can make reality. I also talk about how free speech isn't really free speech, it's paid speech. The people who are able to spend money are the people who are able to say what they want to say. It's that simple. And if you have the people controlling the actual airwaves and narrative and all of that, if those people have a certain agenda, that's the agenda that gets heard, and everybody's breathing that air, and I mean, it's not shocking that they were able to undermine entire countries that way. It's actually, especially people who are unsuspecting, we in the United States have lived in a situation where the media has been untrustworthy for a very long time. We know to at least some extent not to trust the media, just straightforwardly. But a lot of these countries were just developing places that just didn't have a media before. It's wild. It's wild, the rabbit hole you can get into talking about that.
And in the old days, it wasn't this kind of open secret that the U.S. knocked over governments. Like in the old days, that's not something you would say. I remember doing the Iran Contra affair, and you had Colonel North, you had all of these people. It was like speech after speech and case after case, and this thing went on for weeks. And that was the first time, at least that I'm aware of, where it was on the pages, like where it was like splashed in the media. Oh my God, we took all of this money to try to overthrow these governments in South America. And this was what they passed the Bolin Act to prevent Reagan from doing it. Reagan did it anyway. And I remember this famous speech where Reagan comes out and the Gipper comes on. And it's like that old thing where they showed the White House first and then it goes to the president. And Reagan gives this astonishing speech of, I didn't know that they were going to try to overthrow the governments of South America, but I'm the Gipper, I'm the president, the buck stops with me, but I didn't really know about it. So, there's that.
Yeah.
And it goes off. And people are like, wait a minute, did Reagan just say that the U.S. was overthrowing governments in South America? Yes, that is exactly what he just said.
I love that's probably one of my favorite aspects of the Iran Contra stuff is the idea that somehow he didn't have any involvement. It's
Yeah, the
like he
president
came out
didn't
basically
know.
was like, yeah, I mean, kind of, but I did. It wasn't me. And then that was the end of it.
Yep. He's like, I'll take the blame, but I really didn't know anything about it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, dude,
It's
sure
such a
you didn't
weird-
know.
It's a weird denial where he basically took credit for it at the same time as denying it, that was such a weird thing.
Yeah, it's super bizarre. The last story before I let you go. So the federal workforce thing, Donald Trump has this article. I mean, they've talked about it in a few places, but I was going through it on this location. So Donald Trump has put a freeze on federal workers. And
Yeah.
in addition to the freeze on federal workers, he has offered a quote unquote buyout, as they call it, a buyout. And the thought is, we will pay you all the way up to September, after which we have no responsibilities to you if you're willing to get out of the workforce now. So if you leave now, we will give you the money all the way up to that point. Now, the catch becomes, is this even legal? Like the president, where does the president get the power to do this? I don't even think this is legal. And as people were pointing out, like what evidence, what proof that these people get paid? So right here, a federal workforce of some 2 million people is still reeling after receiving a mass email that offered the chance to preemptively resign ahead of additional and unspecified Trump administration efforts to shrink the federal government. With the terms of stark but murky ultimatum unclear and likely subject to legal interpretations and challenges, upwards of hundreds of thousands of individual employees were struggling with what to do, increasingly uncertain about the stability of their jobs and their agencies. So these people don't even know if they're going to, keep their jobs. They don't know if they're going to be fired. And on top of that uncertainty, it's like, hey, if you volunteer to leave, we will continue to give you the money. Now, I don't know the assurances associated with that. You've had members of Congress saying, don't do this. There's no way to know that you're going to get paid that money, meaning you may quit now and end up just out of a job without any money going to you at all, because there's nothing to say that this is even legal, let alone the president himself having the capability of doing something like this. I've never heard anything like this coming out of a White House, an executive office, where they're like, we need to shrink the federal government. And the way we're going to do that is, oh, I know, let's just offer to buy out people's contracts.
I have a feeling that there isn't any legal precedent one way or the other, and they're kind of just hoping that a bunch of people act and then they can react and figure out how to justify it or legalize it or whatever. Like we had X number of people leave, and so we're going to deal with it with those people gone. We're going to figure out how to deal where those people were before. How do we, like, I feel like it's a sort of a de facto, like a very libertarian sounding move here. A very allow the government employees to figure this out for us without really them thinking about it that way. Which is
they believe in that it's coming out of Elon Musk. They think it's his brainchild.
Yeah, I think that that sounds like an Elon Musk move to me, because it's getting these people to do the actual quote unquote thinking for you by not having by not like necessarily enforcing any kind of policy. Like they said, they're evaluating all of this stuff in the meantime. That doesn't mean anything. They may not do anything at all. They may the point might just be to get a bunch of people to quit, and then they figure out what to do after the people are gone. I think that's what it sounds like to me. And I wouldn't be shocked if that's an Elon Musk move, because it very much sounds like an Elon Musk move. Have incentives do the thinking for you rather than, actually figure out a responsible policy to implement.
September. I mean, we're in February. So February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. So 7 months of free money.
Yeah.
7 months of free money. Would I do that?
It's not a terrible incentive based. Like if you're thinking about like how much a federal employee might get paid, obviously that's going to vary pretty significantly between different types of positions, but potentially that could be a lot of money.
Like, if you're talking about, let's say $70,000 a year.
Yeah. I mean, somebody could do pretty all right.
And then maybe what, 50,000, give or take? I mean,
Yeah,
we're talking about
somewhere
like
around
7 to
there.
8 months.
Somewhere around there. Yeah.
Oh man. So I guess the question is, do you get up the money all at once? There's that.
That's a good question too. Are you getting it as a paycheck as if you're still employed? I mean, again, there's a good reason why they're saying don't do this. They need stuff in writing. That's as far as I'm concerned. If I were to do this, if I were one of these employees, I would not do it unless I had something in writing guaranteeing, money in a certain method or an upfront thing. Like if I had a check that had that amount on it, I would do it. Or if I had a contract that said I was going to get paid, bi-weekly until a certain date, X amount of dollars. I don't know. It is definitely, I don't agree with it. I don't think that is a good idea personally. I think that the right thing to do would be, if you're going to attempt to downsize the government, to actually evaluate what is responsible spending and go from the actual top down with, evaluation, analysis, etc. If that's what you wanted to do, the responsible thing to do would be to do the analysis and then enact policy once you have that. But what they're doing, it's in my opinion, very Ayn Randian type. Let the market speak. It's an invisible hand move. You know what I mean?
Yeah, let people figure it out on their own. Yeah, it does feel like an Ayn Rand thing. I mean, all of this does. It just feels like chaos. Yeah. Oh, we're going to freeze federal spending. We're going to freeze money going abroad. We're going to freeze this. We're going to freeze that. And, when the federal judge put the kibosh, basically like, well, dude, you don't even know what you're freezing. No,
there can't be any legal precedent on this. That's the thing.
Well, that's kind of what Congress was saying. Effectively saying, dude, we gave you money to spend. Now go do it. Like this notion that you could just say, well, I'm not going to spend any money because I don't want to spend any money. It doesn't quite work that way. They appropriated. I mean, God, man, each party has their own way of doing this, right? So Obama can come in and he says, because for example, marijuana is a really good example. You would get a situation where, let's say Obama comes in office. Obama says, I'm not going to go after marijuana in California. I'm not going to touch it. Yes, it's against the law. No, I'm not going to do anything about it. In which case, they allow marijuana stores in order to operate, and then they spread to Michigan, etc. Even now, it is still against federal law. And yet, for all intents and purposes, the president just fundamentally ignores the fact that it's against federal law. And we all agree with him on ignoring the fact that pot is against federal law. And so it's like, what's the difference between ignoring something like that versus Trump coming in and doing whatever he's doing with this, basically blowing off Congress? I guess there are different levels, I suppose.
Sure.
Right.
That's I think a very good point. But it's also, in my opinion, really, it highlights how shaky anything is that they don't codify. Yeah. Like everybody talks about how they should have codified Roe versus Wade, and they didn't, specifically because they could have a political argument about it that, worked in their favor. Like it's something like, vote for us and we'll keep this safe. Obviously they couldn't do that. So they failed at that and they didn't codify it. So the whole thing, in my opinion, probably backfired in their faces. But the point I'm making is a lot of these like sort of unspoken laws, I guess you could almost say, or unspoken repeals of on the books laws, they're, for all intents and purposes, pretend. Like if tomorrow Trump decided, oh, we're going to prosecute all the marijuana, there's a bunch of people literally with marijuana stores. Like you have the easiest, like big, insane raid you've ever seen in your life set up across the country. This is maybe a bit of a diversion from the point, but it is kind of scary when you think about like, okay, well, when they just sort of imagine for imaginary reasons, repeal a law, it's I mean, we're actually on a lot of shaky ground if you think about it that way.
All of it's shaky ground. It's all perspective, right? I mean, these people are lawyers. They come up with different theories of the case in regards to pursuing a particular objective. Doesn't need to be true. $50 million worth of condoms going to those Hamas fighters.
What do you think they're going to do with that many condoms?
They're clearly using it for bombs.
I feel like it's probably bombs.
Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a journalist with 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In the book Custom Reality and You, they explore a world where profit is the driving force. You can follow Peter on Twitter at Peter Coffin, and you can purchase their book on Amazon.com. Also, Horseshoe Theory. Check that one out also. Peter, my man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
You have a good one. Be safe. And one of my favorite people to talk to, the man himself, Ted Raw. Ted Raw is a political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, and host of the TMI, Too Much Information, morning show coming on at 10 a.m. Ted, I'm not going to keep you today because I know you have to get to the show. But when you hit me up about the Mayor Adams thing, I wanted to bring you on to talk about it since you live in New York. So apparently Adams is having a conversation with the feds on whether or not to get rid of his case. Now, this is going on at the exact same time as Menendez, who just got 11 years in prison. He's going to appeal clearly, and he came out saying that this was unfair, this was a political witch hunt, this isn't right. Donald Trump has a point about them going after people. And right here, former U.S. Senator Bob Menendez gets 11 years in prison for taking bribes and acting as an agent of Egypt. This could be the ghost of Christmas future for Mayor Adams if the case keeps going. What is going on with the case? I mean, it's how on earth do they change administrations that then all of a sudden it's like, all right, we said we were going to go after you for a crime. We accuse you of committing a crime, but now it's not as relevant. Or is that what's going on? What is going on with the case with Mayor Adams?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, pursuant to your last topic, that if I'd known Hamas was so much fun, I would have enlisted and taken a completely different career path. Okay.
So just so you know what we're talking about. So a clip came out with Donald Trump saying that Hamas got $50 million in condoms from the Biden administration.
They're obviously having a great time over there.
They are, I mean, man, who knew that they were having that much
tunnels are rocking, don't come a knocking.
This is Trump.
Process, we identified and stopped $50 million being sent to Gaza to buy condoms for Hamas. 50 million. And you know what's happened to them? They've used them as a method of making bombs. How about that? In that process, we identified and stopped.
How about that? How about that? How about it's not true? How about that? That instead of it being Gaza, Palestine, it is Mozambique, a Gaza in Mozambique. He gets this completely wrong. And
Are
then
these Pentagon condoms that cost $1 million each, or?
It could. It might be just 50 condoms for all we know.
It could be.
Those condoms are expensive, government condoms. And that is astonishing. And then to add on top of it, oh, and by the way, they were making bombs out of these condoms. It's not even the right place.
Right. It's so funny. It's so ridiculous. All right. So anyway,
just absurd.
Mayor Adams. So we know that Mayor Adams went down to kiss Trump's ring at Mar-a-Lago a little bit ago.
Yes, he did.
And everyone was kind of wondering. It wasn't a public meeting. It was a one-on-one. So everyone was kind of thinking he's going down there to ask for a preemptive pardon because he faces federal charges. It's like, hey, consider me a J6er, right, or something. And there was no sense. I mean, he has since the election, Adams has, moved to the Trump side over and over. He's basically said a lot of nice things about Trump in the press.
Yes, he has.
Try to ingratiate himself. It's pretty transparent. So the question now is if these now this is it's a wrinkle, because I was expecting Trump to say, okay, I'll pre-pardon you. And then the DOJ says, well, there's no point moving forward with the case because, if we get a conviction, it'll just be null and void. But This is a different approach if this report is accurate. This approach is more like Trump calling the DOJ, and I don't know, it's not weaponizing them. I guess it's de-weaponizing them or something.
Defanging the DOJ.
Defanging them. So it would be definitely interference from the White House in the prosecution of the current sitting mayor of the city of New York. it's definitely notable. And then there's the political implications here is, Mayor Adams is about as popular as laundry lint in New York City. His polls are absolutely in the toilet. He's a disaster, and people just hate him. Democrats, moderates, Republicans, everyone. And the other problem is that the charges that he faced are kind of non-controversial in their nature. It's like these are exactly the kind of political corruption charges that a mayor should go down for, right? Like, literally, lining the pockets of his close friends and relatives, sacrificing public safety telling fire inspectors to turn a blind eye to problems, at a building that could catch on fire and people could die as a result of this. It's like also it's a mayoralty that feels not only corrupt but also incompetent. Years ago, there on Long Island, on the town of Roslyn, there was a school corruption scandal. There's a great movie you can watch. I think it's on HBO called Bad Education. The name's terrible, but it's all about this. And basically, Roslyn is an upscale school district. And it turns out that the people who are running the district, like the superintendent and school board, they were all like on the take. The brilliance of the scheme was that it was a good school system. So nobody was really upset, right? I mean, they didn't take so much that the kids had bad equipment, that that they weren't hiring good teachers or not giving raises. They took enough to line their pockets, but they kept their eye on the ball, and the district was in good shape. This is not that. Mayor Adams is seen, rightly or wrongly, as a bad mayor. The city is falling apart. I mean, I'm this morning preparing for my show. I read an article about like some kids stole a subway train yesterday. Okay, out of.
Wait. Did you say they stole a subway train?
Yeah, they broke into the train yards in Queens and took the train on a joyride at 30 miles an hour on the tracks.
You're not talking about a ticket. You're talking about the entire train.
They took the train, like they drove the train. Okay, now. Granted, this is the MTA. Adams, the mayor, doesn't supervise the MTA. But I mean, it's just sort of but it's the NYPD that's supposed to catch these kids, and they haven't, right? I mean, and this is the second time it's happened under his watch. And so, I mean, it's just sort of that sort of thing. It's just like the city's out of control. And so it's like if Adams had, Jimmy Walker style, like pocketed a few, extra bucks, but everything's cool. Like let's say we found out Giuliani wasn't corrupt, but let's just say when we found out Giuliani was kind of loopy and cheating on his wife and all that, we didn't care because the city was doing well. This is not that. So I think the calculus from the White House, if they decide to do this, is for Trump, there's no downside because he doesn't care about New York City at all. And then, it's dead to him politically, and he's not running for re-election anyway. The upside is that it's his opportunity to sort of put his thumb on the scale and show that he can. That's what this is really about. It's like it sends the message out to other politicians, other power brokers. Like, if you were in trouble and the DOJ was after you, this is the anti-Nixon. Nixon's like, I don't like you. I'm going to audit your taxes. This is like, I don't like you. I do like you. I might have the IRS de-audit your taxes. Yeah. So that's what this is. It's like it's mafia. It's like not everything's about threats. It's also about favors. Mafiosos often give favors, as we saw in the famous opening scene of The Godfather with the as Marlon Brando stroking his cat, like I will do you this favor, right? That's what this is. This is that. So Donald Trump, if he does this, does not care about Adams at all. This is more just like sending a message, like I could do this.
I know, but like you said, Adams has no political clout in New York. Like usually, Did you ever watch Boss, Kelsey Grammer?
No.
Okay, it is one of I've never seen Kelsey Grammer be that good in anything. It is astonishing. Really? Yes, it is mind blowing. He plays this kind of mayor of New York mayor of Chicago who has what is it, like a degenerative brain disorder, but he doesn't want. Well, it's not really a brain worm, but it's like ADS or what is it called? Like like Al Gehrig's disease or whatever the thing is called.
Lou
But
Gehrig's disease.
it's Lou Gehrig's disease. Whatever the disease is, though, it is eating his brain, like paranoia. He is losing his faculties, all of that stuff. But he doesn't want to give up power, and so he's become this kind of like caged animal as he's trying to keep this a secret while also trying to maintain power and control of Chicago. It is damn good. It is one of the best political shows.
Thank you. Check it out.
It is damn good. But part of the one of the interesting things in that is his ability to control the governorship, to control other areas and districts, has to do with his political clout, like his power in Chicago, because Chicago is so big. As Chicago goes, so does the governorship. So it allowed him to have this kind of control over the governorship at a distance. I don't see that with Adams. Like, I don't see this notion that Adams has, like you said, he's unpopular.
Okay.
He will probably lose his next race.
For sure.
Yeah. So I don't know what Trump would get out of giving him a political favor like this. Not to mention, there's something dicey about the president doing this at all.
It's extremely dicey, right? I can't think of anything like this ever happening before. I'm going to have to, check my historical brain cells and see if, like, Mayor Walker did this in the 30s or something.
Yeah.
But, this would be, has to be come from the president. I don't think anything like this has happened before. And he may not do it. I don't think this is about, Donald Trump doesn't think he's going to get anything back from Mayor Adams that he needs or wants. I don't know, maybe, he'll turn a blind eye to some zoning, issue related to his business, but Trump's got that covered anyway, right? So I don't think that's it. I think this is about sending a message to everyone, right? Like, literally, he can, like, let's say, you're a governor somewhere and you've been charged with, you face federal charges for, name it, whatever. It's like, this is Donald Trump's way of saying, look, remember what I did for the mayor of New York?
Work with me.
You have a choice, work with me or go to the clink, like Mayor, like Governor Blagojevich of Illinois did. Like, work with, so do it my way or we'll do it the hard way. That's what this is about. He doesn't care. It's not a quid pro quo. This is about, like, giving a favor to show that he can and that he can get away with it, right? Like most, like, let's say President, let's say President Biden had promised someone else, I can get you off federal charges. Everyone would say, like, I don't believe you. I think you're just going to, like, tell me that, and then I'm going to go to jail anyway. So I'm not going to do what you want. People believe Trump, and they know he's so crazy he may do this, but the only way to really prove it is to actually do it for someone, and that's what it is. Mayor Adams is useless.
I can't believe this is legal. This can't be legal. I mean, I guess he has the ability to do a pardon, but that's not really what's happening, though.
Right. The pardon's not as elegant and beautiful, to paraphrase a Donald Trump expression. Like, the beauty of this is, like, I can show that I can pull off the dogs of, like, a federal agency and make them stop. Like, if you have a mean pit bull and you walk it down the street, there's two powers. We think of the one power, which is the power of you to sick your dog on someone. But there's also the power of you to restrain your dog and not have them bite someone. That's what this is about.
Oh, this is so disturbing. I mean, because for all intents and purposes, this is the president corrupting the Justice Department. I don't really look, I can accept a pardon, right? Trump has given ungodly pardons at this point to people who I would wager are far worse than Mayor Adams. I mean, what's his name? The Proud Boy guy that they let out, the one that was going to get the guns from Virginia and have a revolution. Tarrio, I believe, Enrique Tarrio. Yeah, this stuff was horrible, right? So it wouldn't shock me for a pardon. I guess I don't. There's something inherently wrong with this level of control being exerted by a president, especially even over top of the Justice Department itself. It's just weird. Some of the stuff I give Donald Trump a pass on, like going after Mark Milley, for example. I give him a pass on that. or the 51 intelligence officials. Again, give them a pass on that. I mean, they did go after him, and they did
True.
go with this thing of this kind of massive psyop on the American public.
And
So
I don't know, and and I think we talked about this back in the day. I never understood why anyone who's not currently working for the government has security clearance. Why? I mean, I know why, but they shouldn't.
yeah, I forgot who I was talking to about that. They pointed out that they get jobs a part of the federal government even when they leave. So they may be, say, for example, like Raytheon wants to bring somebody on for some kind of new plan for a jet fighter that they're working in coordination with the government with. Okay, well, that person is in the private sector, but they still need their security clearances to be able to
And they
see.
should apply for it from scratch.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, and a lot of them, they basically sell that security clearance. They're like, hey, I have top security clearance. Hello, Northrop Grumman, hire me. Or hello, Fox News, I can come on as an analyst. I know things that, other people don't know. They shouldn't be able to do that. I mean, you tell me what, I mean, I don't know, like, does a former astronaut get to just show up at NASA and walk on with they keep their ID and like, hey, let me take a a rocket up for fun? I mean, like, no.
Oh, by the way, before I let you go, did you see? So, do you remember when those astronauts went up for Boeing and the Boeing craft screwed up? There were damages associated with it. And for whatever reason, the craft couldn't take those astronauts back.
Mhm.
They are still there.
Oh, man.
Did you know that?
No, I thought there was some plan. Wasn't Russia going to bring one back? They had an extra seat or something like that.
I don't know. I thought I did not realize that those astronauts were still there.
Man.
And apparently,
It's like Planet of the Apes.
It's been like 7 months.
Right.
And so
By the time they
apparently
come back,
Trump,
we're all going to be gone. Statue of
It's
Liberty will be in the
bizarre.
sand.
so Trump goes to Elon and say, "Hey, Elon, go get our astronauts."
I like it. Although
Well,
he can't
I mean,
just do that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just that willy-nilly
It's
of
not a cab.
yeah,
It's not
right.
an Uber.
right. It's like, yeah, Elon, sure. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'll just go up tomorrow and pick up the astronauts. I don't think it works that way.
No.
I think the other part to this was there are no contingency plans in place.
Yeah.
Like they have been up there for like 7 months, give or take. Bone density loss, everything else, cosmic
true.
rays, and how are there no because in the movies, and maybe I'm thinking about this too much like the movies. There's always this escape pod that
Yeah, like
can
in
take
Gravity.
2 people, right? And you just get in the pod and you go hurling down to Earth, and you splash down, and everybody's great. But there are only ever 2 spots in it, so if you have 3 people, one guy's going to have to stay behind. Apparently, that's not even. They don't even have that.
No. It's really not that changed from, space exploration has always been kind of it's binary, right? You either come back safe and sound, or you come back like in pieces on, pieces of dust, all carbonized from reentry. It's still like that. It's absolutely terrifying. This reminds me of that guy the Soviet cosmonaut who was stuck up there when the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, so your country doesn't exist anymore. Sorry, dude. And they really weren't sure if they were going to be able to get him back, to Kazakhstan,
terrifying.
but they did ultimately, of course. It does seem like, well, look, I mean, there's not a lot. This is very expensive technology. There's like kind of no room for anything spare, right? Like there's no extra stuff, right? Like we don't have a jump seat. But maybe it's something that we should start thinking about, especially if people like Elon Musk are trying to sell space as a tourist destination.
Mhm.
They're going to have to sort of make it, try to give the illusion that there might be some chance of coming back if things go wrong.
What's the illusion of being able to come back?
Well, it's kind of an illusion, right? I mean, it's sort of like on airplanes. I mean, I had a really interesting experience. I sat across from a jump seat, a flight attendant on a Lufthansa flight once, and I noticed she had terrible scarring on her legs, and it was right after 9/11, and somehow we were like, it was like 6 of us on the plane, and so we struck up a convo. She's like, we've got the little vodkas going. And she told me what happened. And she's like, she was in a plane crash in I think it was in Cleveland years before. And she ended up like, in a tree, like most of the people died, like the runway on fire. She's like still strapped to her seat. And so she was talking about, I said, oh, I remember how I struck up the conversation. I said, she wasn't wearing her seatbelt. And I go, no seatbelt? And she goes, it is all bullshit. And I'm like, what? What do you mean it's all bullshit? She goes, I know. And she told me the story. And she goes, when the plane crashes, she goes, that's just to make everyone feel good. The truth is, people throw their own children out of the way to get to like a spot that seems safe. The everything falls apart. It's all crap. Like none of this means anything. Like you could stand around and walk around during the crash. It would be the same impact. It's like makes no difference because you're coming in at hundreds of miles an hour and you're just gonna be torn apart. The fact that anyone ever survives a plane crash is really like miraculous and unusual.
Yeah, that's the shocking part, that they live.
Yeah.
I mean, and that used to be my thought too. It's like, okay, dude, if this plane goes down in the middle of the ocean, we're all dead. Why are we having this pretense? Like it's not going to be that
For
way.
sure. Yeah, like in the event of a water landing. I know there's there's Sully. The reason that we talk about Sully is because it's crazy, weird, and unusual.
Yeah. Yeah. I when they ask about emergency seats, and you're like, sir, are you capable of lifting a 200-pound man? Yeah, totally. I am.
No problem.
Do that. Yeah, no problem. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to die. Right? Like, I don't have this
I was in
belief.
a plane incident where it was a minor thing. I was with my mom and flying out of Paris, Christmas Day. It was snowing. The plane hadn't. Anyway, the point is, the plane barely gets off the ground, maybe 30, 40 feet. And then you see the wind socks right at the airport. Well, the wind direction, sometimes it like shifts like instantaneously and the engines stall because they're starved of air. So that's really dangerous. That's the worst thing that can possibly happen. And so both engines stalled. We came back down and skidded off the runway, right into the slush. And we had to evacuate the plane through using the slides. And the Air France had seated with us, like, Biden aged guy next to the door. And he gives me this really dumb Biden like moo cow expression. Like, what? Like, what? What do you expect me to do? And so in French, I'm like, hey, old timer, get the fuck out of the way. So the point is, you mentioned having to lift that thing. When they say, just open that door. Okay, so I was like 40 and I'm 6'2" and I'm not a small guy. And I'm like, it was all I could do to pick that thing up and pull it in and throw it out the door. It is hard. Okay. They not pretty much like no woman, I hate to say this, unless she's like, like in the WWE should be allowed to sit next to that door. It should be like kind of guys who that's all. Really, yeah. No one over 60, no one under 20. It's like it should just be like dudes, strong dudes. And so it's just so funny. It's like, so we did go out we all got out. We all saw it. I mean, nothing happened. The plane didn't crash. No one was seriously hurt. Some bruises. But that experience was like, this is a ridiculous situation. Also, it takes forever to get people off the plane because the aisles are too narrow. The rows are too narrow. They should be like, forget about like a few inches. They should be twice as wide as they are. They should be like, you should be able to stretch your legs out all the way and barely touch the seat in front of you. Then you might be able to get out quickly.
Oh, they don't want to do that because if they did that, they would pack more seats in. They would be like,
for sure. Yeah, remember Ryanair wanted people to sort of stand at one point. There was this sort of squatting stand kind of chair that was sort of like it was insane. They were like, oh, it'll be great. We'll have 600 people on a plane. Yeah.
Ryanair was trash. I mean, it was a few of those budget airlines that kind of popped up out of the blue, especially in Europe. Less so in America, but definitely in Europe. Ted, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. We will see what happens with Mayor Adams. As a prediction, do you think he's going to get the Trump's favor in this?
It's more likely than not. I don't think it's 100% by any means. I think it's like, 60-40. But, there's plenty of room for, Trump may look at this and just be like, this is a bridge too far. And he may also view it in a very, kind of exchangist kind of way. Like, what do I get from Mayor Adams? Nothing. Maybe I'll save this for someone who I like better. But, if I got to say, if I were him, not if I were me as president, but if I were him as president, I probably would do it.
Ted Rawl, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, co-host of TMI Morning Show with the great one and only Manila Chan, starts at 10 a.m. On their YouTube channel. Definitely check them out. Thank you, Ted. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. Always fun.
You have a good one, man. Be safe.
You too. All right.
Oh, that is, man, I got to be honest. Those plane crashes are terrifying. Speaking of plane crash, I pointed out this morning, my mom sent me a note last night saying that there was a crash in DC. Apparently, near where I used to live in DC. I'm seeing if I still have that clip. So this is American Airlines hitting a Black Hawk helicopter. And yes, I as weird as that sounds, that's exactly what happened. So this is a clip of this. Apparently this took place, I guess, last night. There's an airplane from Washington, D.C. And if this is the right video, right there. Here's that version of it. And it looks like an airplane. Is that it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Okay, that probably is not the best video. Let's try this one. But apparently, oh, there it is. You can see it in the background. And Jesus, look at that. All right, so if you look at it, you can see the plane coming. So right there, that little light. It's going to make contact. Boom. Helicopter or airplane runs into a helicopter. Again, I have no idea how that happens. I have no idea how that happens. But this was apparently at Reagan's International Airport, Washington, D.C. That's astonishing. That is astonishing. I have no idea how that happens. How does that happen? Like, look, if you're in DC, there's all sorts of, you hear helicopters all the time. You hear airplanes all the time. You hear emergency vehicles all the time. That's not necessarily the weirdest thing in the world. There's always a helicopter somewhere in DC. There's all sorts of military bases that are near the White House. And so anytime you're driving home, you could look up and there's a helicopter. It is a secondary thing, though, for air traffic control, or for that matter, the pilot, not be able to identify that there's another plane in the air or another helicopter in the air, and you run into it. That is an astonishing thing. I think, from my understanding, there were like 60 people involved in this. I don't know if all of those people are dead. It looked, based on that video, I'd be shocked if any of those people are still alive. So, just amazing. Yeah, I used to live there too. But I want to go to my guests. We are joined with KJ No, great friend of the show. He's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. KJ, my man, how you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. I brought you on because of this kind of thing about DeepSeek. I was fascinated about this. So OpenAI has their ChatGPT and everything else. And this was this kind of AI hopium that was going to be out, this kind of new revolution of AI. And the belief is, okay, this is going to take $100 million. It's going to take a massive amount of money, time, engineering, etc. Then China comes in, spends $10 million, and comes up with a pretty decent, see, it's slightly different. Because I was looking at shows on this yesterday trying to explain how this process works. And they point out that this is momentous in general. And they describe it kind of like a Sputnik moment, where you have this kind of new piece of technology that blows the other pieces out the water. Not necessarily because it's functionally better, but because they've been able to do it, but cheaper. And they described it kind of like the difference between a mainframe and a laptop. It seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they trained DeepSeek on some of the other more expensive larger language models. And based on the training, has been able to come up with answers that are just as good as the answers that are coming from, let's say, the other larger language models that they were effectively being trained on, basically coming up with semblance of an answer for much, much cheaper of a price. Now, I've seen some of the research on this showing that there's hallucinations and everything else, but that's almost secondary to the point. The fact that it's open source, the fact that it has been able to keep up with the big boys for a fraction of the price. They described it, the difference between like a mainframe and a laptop. It's like, yeah, you have mainframes that people are using at these companies and everything else, but most people could get by with a laptop. And if you can have something like a DeepSeek or something similar to a DeepSeek on the various computers, then you can put this kind of high power system into the hands of all of these businesses and all of these people for whatever particular reason they want to use it for. It makes AI to be something that is universally used. And since it's open source, you can effectively see what's going on behind the scenes. Give me your take on this. I was fascinated by this, especially with $1 trillion of market share going up in smoke over the course of like 2 days.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Some people have said that it is a $1 trillion wake-up call. And if I'm not mistaken, NVIDIA, which manufactures the graphics processing units, the chips that they use for AI, lost at one point 580, almost $600 billion, 17% of its valuation. So it really is a game changer.
And by the way, the reason it lost that money is because people realize, wait a minute, they've been able to do this without using NVIDIA chips. Basically, they were able to get something that worked similar without using the technology that the people were saying was necessary in order to do it.
Yeah, no, there's a very, very interesting lesson there, which I will get to. But, just to go back to the numbers, according to their information, they said that they were able to train DeepSeek for the cost of $5.6 million. ChatGPT-4 cost $100 million to train. And we don't know, we're not sure, but we think that ChatGPT-5 cost $1 billion. So you're looking at orders of magnitude of savings, which is incredible, which is essentially just blows the entire business model out of the water, because it tells you that huge moat that they created to kind of guard their proprietary information is simply a moat built by hype, greed, and complacency. And DeepSeek has just blown that out of the water, and they put everything that they have done out in the public as open source. And so this is really transforming the nature of the AI industry. Before, AI was something that only rich countries and rich corporations with multi-hundreds of billion dollar valuations could even get in the game of. In fact, I think Sam Altman actually said, to the Indians, don't even try it. It's impossible. You want to do it for 10 million? You cannot do this. And ChatGPT has just done it for 5.6 million. Kai-Fu Lee had said even before that they could do something comparable for about 3 million. And most recently, this is news out of a research team at UC Berkeley, they did a scaled down version of the tech for $30.
Really?
Yes, I just sent you that link. You can read the entire, the article. But what this shows is that the Chinese have democratized AI by putting it out as open source and then giving us multiple distilled versions that can run on very, very simple platforms. It means that anybody in the global south who has a laptop or even a phone can use some distilled version of DeepSeek without even having an internet connection. And then they can start to use AI for whatever they need. So it is an incredible democratization of the technology. And if we think of AI as a war, as people like Eric Schmidt have framed it, they see it as the great war, the great tech war. DeepSeek is like the AK-47. It's like the Kalashnikov. It equalizes. You have the great imperial powers with their massive armies, and then you have the rebel fighters fighting for liberation, and they have something which is simple, sturdy, reliable, but it equalizes the odds. And it's like the Kalashnikov of the AI wars, if you will. And so I think it really is revolutionary.
No,
Now,
I agree with you. No, please continue. No, I was just saying I agree with you. Keep going.
now you asked about how they did it, and you can read the paper. People are bloviating without reading any of the papers. These guys published some really, really solid documentation and analysis. It's all in the public, not just the code, but how they did it. They explain it all, and they show they used mix of experts. They reduced it from a 32-bit floating point number to an 8-bit floating number. They used reinforced learning, which means that they didn't have to have these they didn't have to have these large data sets that were pre-labeled, and it's a kind of like deep mind, this kind of continuous reinforcement learning. So these are all brilliant innovations, and you look at them. You look at the team. They're young, fresh-faced students. They look like a team of college researchers.
Yeah.
And the picture I saw, half of them were young women.
Yep.
And it's just, you can see the kind of energy and the creativity in their eyes. But what the US was planning to do was they were planning to shut China's AI development out completely. They put sanctions on the chips, they put sanctions on the tech. They called it, a 4-point chokehold, which was designed to kill China's technology. And certainly, they were going to prevent China from developing AI, which they consider to be the technological, frontier and the most important technology for control of the world, of the future. And these guys just kind of, just flipped it on its head. But I'll give you a little analogy. There's a writer called Jeanette Winterson, really, really brilliant writer. When she was growing up, she grew up in a fundamentalist household, and she was not allowed to have any books. The only book that she was allowed to read was the Bible, and her, parents or her mother was this crazy fundamentalist that, if you had a book that was not the Bible, you were bringing the devil into the house. And so what she did was she would sneak books into our house, and then she would read them and she would stick them under her mattress. And then pretty soon her mattress got higher and higher until it was like 4 inches higher above, where it was. And then one day she came home and she noticed that her mother had discovered her book cache and was throwing all the books out of the window and burnt all of them. And, this analogy is getting too long, but the US is like that fundamentalist, crazy mother, who wants to deprive this person of books. What did Jeanette Winterson do? She just wrote her own books. And she's one of the most brilliant creative writers of her generation. And all of this is a roundabout way of saying that, if you create those kinds of constrictions, people are just going to become more creative, which is exactly what DeepSeek did. They took a small team of, PhD students and researchers, and then they just applied incredible creativity to the process. And they're doing what OpenAI or others did for 1/11th, 100th, maybe 1/1000th of the cost. And it just goes to show you that, it's trite. Necessity is the mother of invention, but it's incredible what they did. So
It's astonishing. And I love this analogy of this idea of a mainframe versus a computer, because the guy who's kind of going to this explanation, he was a tech channel. He was going into like the mechanics of it, how it works. And he downloaded it himself. He was messing with it, playing with it himself. And he was pointing out, he was like, you don't even need these kind of high-end computers in order to run DeepSeek. You can run it on basic computers. Like even somebody with just a basic laptop at home will be able to run it. Small businesses will be able to run it. And I think he was trying to make this analogy with this idea of, in the same way that most companies wouldn't be able to afford a mainframe, but they could afford a computer, that DeepSeek may fit that niche of allowing, like you said, democratization of AI in a way that would not have been the case before. Like, the amount of money that it would have cost to get for a company to get whatever Altman came up with, or whatever some of these major companies came out with, they would have charged through the nose, especially if they were going to be the only place where you could have gotten it from.
They have
And
been.
now-
They've been
Yeah.
charging $200 for the same thing that you can get from DeepSeek for nothing.
Wow. Just think of how much money they have lost in this process. So I guess the question becomes, now what? Now that all of the funding sources have drained up, or at the very least a huge amount of the money has been drained out in regards to their stock options. So what do they have to do? They have to build this now on the cheap, meaning OpenAI. Like what? I got to be honest, I haven't read into what they are going to do. I was reading more so into DeepSeek. But I guess that begs the question of, okay, now that they've made proof of concept that something like that could be done cheaper, significantly cheaper, like radically cheaper, and get somewhat of a similar product, what does it mean for OpenAI? And what does it mean for these kind of other products coming out of the US that are bloated? And I don't want to say bloated, because for all intents and purposes, DeepSeek was trained on these kind of large models. It's just that they've been able to get a really good approximation of those models much cheaper without the NVIDIA chips and everything else, which, if you're an investor, you look at that and you say, wait a minute, they built that for $10 million and they didn't even have these kind of super NVIDIA chips and they were still able to get an approximation of it. Well, you can imagine, you may feel some kind of way about that if you invested a huge amount of money into it and your first thought is the Chinese are going to take over. I mean, this kind of puts you in the mind of the EV market, right? Where the US is like, well, we can't allow EVs from China into the United States. If so, the game is over. They can build a better product than Tesla and they can build it for cheaper. We can't compete. It's the same thing now true for AI, especially on this kind of, let's say, mid-level scale of the AI system.
It's a system-wide issue. It's actually across all sectors. There's a think tank called ASPI. It's a very hawkish anti-China think tank from Australia, Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And they have estimated of 64 critical technologies, 64 cutting-edge critical technologies, quantum computers, etc. The Chinese lead in 57 out of 64 of these critical technologies.
Wow.
So it's way ahead of the United States. The US used to lead in almost all of these technologies 2 decades ago. Now China is leading in almost all of them. US only has, still has the edge in 7 of them, but China is catching up closely. So, it is paradigm shifting. But what it does is it puts the lie to this canard that the Chinese cannot innovate, that they're not creative. I mean, the thing is, and once again, people don't understand this. China has been building up this capacity for decades. Didn't just come out of nowhere. How did it do this? What it did was it started educating people and created mass literacy, and then it started improving education at the lower levels and just continually built up. And now it has the best research graduate institutions in the planet. If you look at a list of the top 20 research institutions doing, top-notch science and technology, about 3/4 of them are Chinese. Okay, and this contrasts with, for example, I mean, you can think of India. India started out from the same place, formerly colonized, incredibly poor, large population, impoverished. India's policy of education was to put its focus on elite educational institutions. So they have some really top-notch, technology institutes, and these people put out, great engineers, great scientists. But the Chinese didn't do that. What they did was they just brought everybody up. They started with making sure that everybody had really good basic education. And then you go to the next step and the next step and the next step. And then you realize how that builds incredible infrastructure of, intellectual capacity that if they want to, they can apply that at any single moment on any single topic. And they're going to have extraordinary results. I mean, if you doubt that, pick up, a Chinese middle school math textbook and see how many of those problems you can solve. You can see they're making those kids study really, really hard. And they're really, trained from a very young age to figure things out, to solve problems, to be creative. And so it's a completely different paradigm, but it, really shifts. Now, the other thing that I'll point out is your question. What are the countermeasures, or how is, OpenAI and Meta and how these guys going to respond?
Right.
There is how they should respond, which is they should open up their stuff, right? They should
they're not going to do that.
open source too. And instead of coping, they should start coding, right? Less cope, more code. They could do what the Chinese, what DeepSeek has done, which is start to apply themselves to doing some really good analysis and creating some real code. But I don't think that's what they're going to do. And the early signals show that they're essentially attacking China. And when I say attack, DeepSeek has already gone down several times with these massive DDoS attacks, right?
Yeah.
They've been tagging the service, taking it down repeatedly. And so, I don't know who's behind it, but you can certainly think about who's benefiting from that. And then, of course, they're attacking it through propaganda. They're saying, DeepSeek stole everything from us. Well, if they stole everything, show the receipts, show us what you did so that we can actually compare, what it was you did before. And they say, oh, we haven't published anything, but they stole the stuff that we had already thought about. I mean, come on, that's really...
It's open source. It's open source. Like, you can literally look at the...
You can look at it. Yes.
No,
you can look at what they did. And it also, kind of begs the other issue, which is that OpenAI stole everything from the internet. They scraped everything off of the internet. They literally stole everything off the internet. And so even if you think that there's no proof of this, but even if you think that everything that DeepSeek did was stolen from OpenAI, the only thing that OpenAI did was return it back to the commons, return it back to the people. These guys are the Robin Hood of AI, Yeah. So I think there's a profound shift. And what it really is, people say, oh, this is China versus the US. No, it's open source versus closed source. It's people who want to share knowledge with other people, who want to bring everything out into the light, into the open, into the commons, and those who want to privatize it and turn it into, a kind of, private property that they can greedmonger and gouge people over.
This is fascinating because it's an ideological argument at its very bare bones, at its very basic level. It's an ideological conversation that's taking place, communists versus capitalists, in the way that they effectively operate, not just for AI, in a way that you pointed out, they democratize artificial intelligence, but even on the means by which to get artificial intelligence. For example, because as you were recounting what China was doing in the context of school, I started thinking of the US. And one of the arguments I always make is that we have an intellectual arms race taking place across the globe, especially the more sophisticated our world gets technologically or scientifically. The more brains, the more people you need to be able to be technologically and scientifically sophisticated to be able to understand a more complicated world. All right. What is better? To create bar on entry to that, where you're going to say you need to give me $50,000 if you want a high school or if you want a college education, or do you make it free? And, as opposed to saying the capitalist point of view, how can we maximize our profit? We have people who want a future. And because those people want a future, those people are going to be willing to pay us out the nose. They're going to go into debt over the course of 20 years in order to get a future where they're not necessarily poor, where they have a better chance of success in life. As opposed to, it is in our best interest as a country for people, anybody who wants to go to school, to be able to do so and do it without this kind of $50,000, $60,000 hedge. In doing so, one, opens education up to anybody who wants it, and your country is better off for it. The other one tries to find a way to make a buck for a 1%, and in doing so damages the entirety of the country. In doing so, when you were talking about the education facilities, the schools, the way that they did education in regards to making it free and open, that is not the way we do education here. Like the same way that they're doing AI, where they're like, we're going to spend a huge amount of money on it. We're going to fleece the public in order to use it. We're going to privatize it. So it is going to be corded off by a bunch of cops in order to prevent anybody from getting access to it. And the other group is like, it's free. Everybody can have that. Enjoy. Those are radically different ways of thinking, not just in the AI sense, but also in the education sense, meaning the means by which to get the AI. These are different things. These are very different things.
Right. Yes. What you do is, do you enclose the means of production of knowledge, or do you open it up? Do you give everybody the means of production of knowledge? And the Chinese response is clear. They're a socialist country, or aspiring to be socialist. They want win-win. You share it, everybody wins. And, the guy who started, this company, he said that, we're not in it for the profit. He's saying we're charging a tiny amount that covers our costs, but we're not in this for the profits. We believe that our moat is doing good work that will attract good people, and that we give to society, as opposed to the U.S. mindset, which is zero sum. It's, if I don't get it, somebody else will. Therefore, I have to take as much of it as possible. It's really, it's open source versus closed source. It's win-win versus zero sum. And ultimately, it's the difference between a socialist conception of society versus a greed-mongering capitalist mindset. So, let's think a little bit about how most capitalist tech firms operate. The mythology is that they innovate. They create a better mousetrap, and then everybody flocks to them, and then they get rich, and then et cetera, right? And then they, if you're lucky, they do a little bit of philanthropy and toss out crumbs. What they really do, almost all of them, what they really do is they steal from the commons. Okay, they steal from that which exists in the commons, and then they enclose it, and they make it proprietary. And they sell it back to you in shitified. And then what they do is they sue all their competitors, right? That is really the model of how most tech companies operate. It's true for Microsoft. They privatized stuff that was out in the, that was open source. It's true for, all of them are like that. And, for example, you look at the big, lawsuits, Google versus Oracle. Google developed Android using some, Unix code that was considered to be in the public domain, and Oracle sued them for what, $8 billion, because they had bought Sun Microsystems and they claimed that it was their proprietary property. Or Apple suing Samsung because Samsung made a phone that was shaped like a rectangle, right? So this is what they do. I mean, they're not really tech firms anymore. They're PR firms or law firms with a little tech, with a little IT department. And this is what they do: is they privatize, they steal the commons, they privatize it, they enclose it, they make it proprietary, and then they sue the hell out of all competitors. And it looks like that OpenAI, is gearing up for that too. It looks like, there's scuttlebutt that they're going to sue DeepSeek. I wish them good luck on that.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, they stole everything that they have, that they use to train their models on. But, this is, as you point out, it's the fundamental difference between a win-win, socialist mindset and this avaricious, greedy, zero-sum capitalist mindset. And we can see which is going to have, the greatest effect on society.
KJ, man, thank you for this. Yeah, I was fascinated by the story. I was fascinated. I mean, I did software engineering before I got into doing media. I was a software engineer for like 10 years. Some of the stuff I can wrap my head around, like in regards to, I can conceivably come up with a training mechanism where you're training a computer to do something over and over and over and over again, where it gets, it's like, okay, when you have success, give it a certain value, in which case at the end of the process, the computer is better at doing a particular thing. Okay, that's one thing. How they do the large language model stuff is fascinating to me. I have no idea how they do it.
Well, it's not that complex. It's just a brute force approach. They call them transformers, right? You take large data sets and then you train them to predict the next token or the next word. And it's literally, I went to the store, I went to the store to buy some. You can guess what that is. Statistically, if you have a large enough database, you can figure out what that next word is. And you do that over and over again. You train it over and over again using neural networks. And then you are able to generate, these entire strings or tokens. And that's why, GPT is generative, pre-trained transformer, right?
So much data. God, man, that's so much data. Because if you think about it, you would have to have, let's say, massive amounts of data. And within the context of the conversations that's associated with that data, you would have to do some kind of search to say, okay, what percentage is most likely to come up next based on all the information that we have available. And so you might have car, 80%, Bob, 10%. And based on that, you could say, okay, well, we think it's going to be car, in which case car comes up. That requires a massive amount of data in order to make that work. But to your point, they train DeepSeek to do that without having to go through all of that other process, effectively training it on these other larger language models.
Right.
Oh, man,
There's constant reinforcement of that process, which is, this is one of the hacks. The other thing is, I mean, if you think about it, AI boils down to two different things. One is a brute force approach, which is largely developed out of connectionism. It comes out of the 1960s perceptrons, which are designed to model, or it's a, kind of a simulation of how they think neurons work, and you just build connections that eventually get reinforced. And for that, you need, massive amounts of data that is continually reinforced through weights. The other system, or the other approach, which was primary until the early 2000s, what is called the physical symbol systems hypothesis. That is, you represent some aspect of reality using a physical symbol or a token. You generate discrete rules, and then you have a limited, space, and then you determine what is the optimal pathway to reach your goals through that. I mean, best example is chess, right? You have these chess playing computers. Chess is discrete. The pieces are discrete. It's a limited, constrained field, and then what you can do is you can derive algorithms as well as heuristics that will put you in the best position. It's still incredibly computationally complex, but you can get quite far with that. But you don't get general intelligence, you don't get language processing, you don't get visual recognition, you don't get all the things that we would consider to be typical human common sense behaviors and capabilities. So for that, you need to go to large data sets using neural networks, machine learning. And when you do that, you don't quite know what you'll be getting. You'll get probabilistic results, but you don't know if those results are actually correct. So the best example of this is the French AI called Lucy. That thing is supposed to be a competitor to all the American and Chinese programs, but it's a complete mess. It can't do arithmetic. It quotes Hitler. It tells you how to illegal drugs. It's a complete mess. And the French say this represents a European civilization. Yes, it does, but not in the way you think it does.
Yeah.
So there are many ways that this can go wrong. But if you do your engineering right, and you use all these skill techniques, mix of experts, reinforced learning, etc., then you have something that can work, which is incredibly powerful. The Chinese have shown proof of concept of this, and now people are taking their work and running with it, and they're going to show that it can be done by anybody. Like I said, this is the AK-47 of AI. It really is, groundbreaking.
Just fascinating. KJ, no. He is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He was contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, where can people find you, by the way? I should ask you before I let you go.
Yeah, they can go to the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. I co-host a show with Amanda Yee, and we cover contemporary topics such as China, AI, and anything else that's relevant, primarily for, geopolitics in the current world that we live.
KJ, you should have told me that. I've had you on this show so many times, and I don't remember. To be fair, I should have just asked you, hey, where could people find you? And I would have found it out myself. Okay, Breakthrough News Network. And what was the name of the show again? The China Report?
The China Report.
Badass. Too modest, man. You got to be like, I don't mean to hold my own horn, but you can catch me at this particular location. No, but man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it, man. Be safe. Oh, by the way, what time does the China Report come on?
It comes on every Tuesday in the afternoon.
Okay, badass. You have a good one, man. Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, KJ, good looking out. He's too modest. Most people on the show, they would have been like, by the way, I am on this show. Come find me on this show. Breakthrough News Network. Why is that name familiar? Why is that name familiar? Breakthrough News Network. Yeah, I have to check them out. In fact, I need to put that in his calendar and keep track of that stuff. Shout out to KJ. And look, he's right. I've heard this called Sputnik. Basically, this is like a moon launch where we are feeling very comfortable with the amount of money that we've been investing in the AI, and then China comes up with this kind of common sense, practical version of artificial intelligence that for most people would suit their needs. Now, when you get to, but keep in mind, there's a catch. This model is only as good as what it's trained on. So, this doesn't necessarily eliminate these kind of larger language models or these other more expensive, sophisticated systems. But the moment that you have one of those systems, it becomes kind of a model for being able to train DeepSeek or whatever else you're going to use on those systems. And so the better the model, the better DeepSeek is going to get. Also, add to this, that they did this on the cheap. What does this look like when you have 20 million, 30 million, 50 million to invest in something like this when China is developing their chips? Like, this system is a sandbox. It's proof of concept. And it's a proof of concept that you ideally would only get better. So each one of us will be walking around with a little AI in our hand, whatever you want to call it. Hey, Bobby, help me do so-and-so. Hey, Junebug, help me find so-and-so. How do you bury a body? How do you score some pot? How do you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. We have come to the end. This is week number 2. No, this is week number 1 that I'm without my Twitter account. Twitter still has not bought back my account. Usually when I'm looking at the number of the people we hear, that number is usually 150 more. And that is because usually I'm also streaming through Twitter, but I cannot stream through Twitter right now because my account has been stolen. So I will beseech all of you to bitch at Twitter and ask them to bring Jamal Thomas's account back. They're not listening to me. There is no human person that you can contact. It is a nameless, faceless corporation. Garland believes that Twitter itself is guilty of this. Basically believes that, I guess, like a dev account or something has effectively stolen it, saying that this is something that's happened to other anti-war voices on the platform. I have no idea. I don't know. I know I want my account back. I know it's bullshit, especially if they're going to charge me for a blue check, and I don't have access to that blue check. The next response is going to go through and to dispute the charge, to effectively say, look, you can't charge me for something when I don't have access to it, and when you don't have any kind of customer service that would allow access to the account. Just aggravating, frustrating. But let's go into stickers. Carl Asperbaum. I'm sorry. I must be dyslexic. When I look at names, I used to butcher names at work. And for whatever reason, when I'm looking at the name, I don't know, the letters transposed or something. I'm sorry. Carl Asperbaum. Super sticker. Thank you, Carl. Leave a comment. I love your comments. Jabari, VOC Media, Adams kissed the ring effectively to get off. Don't blame bruh. I know, right? If you remember, Adams, go back and watch Adams on The View. And I remember at the time, I think I bought on Ted, and I was like, is it me? Or does it seem like he is bending over backwards to be conciliatory to Trump? I mean, he wouldn't necessarily attack them. When they brought up the fascist stuff, he was like, well, I don't like to use the term fascist. They call me those names. He was on The View giving a strident defense of Trump. And even with the immigration stuff, he started saying, Trump has a point about the immigration thing. Joe Biden is screwing up on the issue of immigration. So at a certain point, it did seem like he started to tilt in that direction. If you remember when Joe Biden came to New York, Joe Biden wouldn't even go and see Adams. Joe Biden was pissed off that Adams was bringing up that immigration was an issue. And obviously, he should bring it up. It was an issue. If you're in New York and you're a sanctuary city, and based on the laws of New York, you're not supposed to work with ICE and their deportations. All right, fair enough. If you're a Democratic president, and you are doing something that is screwing up the border because you don't, or you're incapable of dealing with border policy, you are going to make that mayor's life miserable, especially considering New York is supposed to balance their budget. Mayor Adams, I think it was like $1 billion shortfall, something to that effect. And, these guys already are hard up for cops. They already have a train system that apparently is trash, but they don't have enough police or whatever else to ensure the integrity of. And they are simultaneously stuck with dealing with a huge insurge or surge of migrants as a direct result of Joe Biden's policies regarding the border. Joe Biden wanted to go in and wanted to get rid of everything Trump did. Okay, fair enough. You can do that. Is it possible that some of the things that Trump was doing actually was working to the benefit of the country? Well, Adams, when he points out, like, dude, if you're going to have an an immigration policy like this, then you need to cut me a check. Meaning, you can do this. You can have your immigration policy like this. But in the same way that Republicans used to complain about this idea that, okay, you have all of these border regions and we have to pay all of this money in the border regions. And Democrats will say, okay, you're just racist. That's all. You're just racist. That's all. And they're like, no, we have to pay. Some of them might be racist. So there's that. But there's also this aspect of it where they have to pay for that. And so the moment that you start transporting migrants, yes, it is cynical as all hell to effectively use people's lives for political gamesmanship. It was also effective. And you got Democrats in Chicago, Democrats in New York, effectively howling about immigration in a way that up to this point they wouldn't talk about. They would just say it was racist and bigoted to complain about it. And so Adams' thing was, okay, Trump has a point. Now, he went further with this and said that the reason that Joe Biden was going after him, or he was making the argument that Joe Biden was going after him politically using these charges because of what was taking place in regards to him complaining about Joe Biden. Now, I think Ted, and I think many people would say that is nonsense. Adams was deeply unpopular, and it did come across as if he was doing some kind of influence peddling, or at the very least, let's say, doling out cash to people who were in his orbit. I have no idea. At the very least, though, it does seem like he is either kissing the ring or, please, sir, save my ass from jail, please, sir, please, sir. Carl Asperbaum, I think that's right. Thank you, Carl. And Carl Asperbaum, super sticker. Oh, leave a comment. I love comments. I love when people leave comments. It allows me to riff off those comments. Sir Mike Salat, China is like the Borg. They assimilate technology. Sometimes they make it better than the original. That's the rub, though. DeepSeek is not so much that it's better than the original. In fact, from my understanding, there are hallucinations and everything else associated with it, like other systems. They are being trained off the larger systems. So imagine for the moment if I had OpenAI. And OpenAI is spending all of this money. They have these large language models. They have all of the stuff that makes OpenAI. And then I say, hey, I have an idea. What if instead of going through all of that they're doing, I just use OpenAI model and I just train it off of that? And when we're getting answers, we can use that information in order to create our own system. And we can do it on the cheap. We don't even need the same technology like the chips and everything else. We can do it on the cheap. Now, the reason that this becomes a moonshot is because for all intents and purposes, you've effectively allowed something that was reserved for these kind of high-end shops to be used by pretty much anybody. You've shown a proof of concept that this thing can be done for a much cheaper iteration. Now, I suspect that you're going to get something kind of like, okay, you have the Cadillac and then you have a regular car. Most people will get by with the regular car, or you may have some companies that require the Cadillac because you need something that's far more proficient, or for that matter, that's far more accurate. So that may end up being true. But again, not everybody needs a Cadillac. Not everybody needs a mainframe. So most people can get by with a PC. And I suspect the same thing is going to be true for this. And so you may end up with a system where you have different tiers of capability of those systems, where the majority of the people who need to get by just use something small like a DeepSeek. Whereas if you're dealing with this kind of major corporation or this major company, or you're dealing with something that requires a higher level of sophistication in regards to accuracy, then you may have to pay for the larger models. Either way, it's fascinating. Also, from the standpoint of assimilation, keep in mind, Europe is falling behind technologically to the US, to China, and to Russia. This garden is somewhat of a basket case at this point. All right. Europe wanted China to give them tech transfers, tech access. So do you remember when the United States was complaining, China is stealing our technology, China is stealing our technology? Well, what they were talking about was when an American company went into China, China was like, okay, look, if you're going to use our people, you're going to make billions of dollars working in our country. Well, we need to see what you're doing. Meaning, it can't be this kind of exploitive relationship that you have with some of these other countries where you go in, you build military bases, and the country gets nothing out of it, or you extract the resources and the country gets nothing out of it. Yeah, no, it's not going to be that way. You can make billions here. You're welcome to do it. But we need to know and we need to learn what you're doing. And so the US screamed that arrangement, that deal that those corporations made in order to make those billions of dollars is theft. Europe ended up screaming for China to give them the same deal. Effectively say, we need access to your technology. We need to see how you are building these systems and whatnot, which is pretty damn astonishing. Because as I pointed out, the same thing that Europe is asking for now, the US screamed that it was theft. Just astonishing. Like, this is a sea change. This is something different. These are models of society that are effectively competing with one another. And whereas US has spent, $10 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq, how many ever, probably $1 billion or $1 trillion if you add up the other wars associated with Syria, Ukraine, Israel, etc. Not to mention $1 trillion a year. What did we spend it on? Did we get the bang for the buck for all of the money that we effectively spent? And if we didn't get the bang for the buck, and China is not invading countries, they're not blowing up stuff, they're not having these large-scale wars of choice or these incursions or invasions into other countries, they're using their money at home. Yeah, they're building military bases because it's good sense to do that, especially when you're dealing with a competitor like the US who believes in zero-sum relationships. By the same token, a lot of that money is being spent internally. And so you get 200 million people that get raised out of poverty over the course of 20 years. That is an astonishing number. The United States has 320 million people. So they raised 2/3, the equivalent of 2/3 of this country out of poverty in 20 years. It's just astonishing stuff. And for all of this talk about Jon Stewart talking about, well, I mean, they don't pay their workers and they don't have workers' rights and both. They actually do have workers' rights. Jon Stewart doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. It's just fascinating. We're seeing a sea change. We're seeing this turn of the worm in a way that is freaking the US out. I mean, look, Donald Trump, when he is talking about Greenland and he's talking about Panama and he's talking about that's not coming out of nowhere. That's coming out of insecurity, rank, radical, complete insecurity, where this idea at first where we're going to work with Europe and we're going to work with Europe in order to manage the world. And so we're going to have the white world taking over. Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It seems that we have decided we're going to cannibalize Europe, and not just cannibalize Europe. We are going to take what we need to take in order to maintain this kind of super continent of the US, or let's say all of North America under the control of the United States, with the pivot point into the Arctic by getting our access to Greenland. Notice, though, this has nothing to do with Europe. Meaning the only thing that Europe could do is give up Greenland in this process. This is not us working with anybody. This is not us trying to get friends. This is not us trying to win allies. This is not that. We are in a race against China and Russia. And many of these other countries have started to lump together in order to deal with us because we have been such a bad steward of the globe. And so we no longer are going to keep this pretense of working with Europe and all. We have our own sphere of influence, and we need to ensure that sphere of influence is secure and can deal with the challenges of the world that we are presented with. You can listen to Trump when he says, talking about this idea that, wow, if Canada, America, and all of us come together, we will be unstoppable. We will be unbeatable. Okay, well, implicit in that is this insecurity that you are beatable, you are stoppable, that you do not feel secure within the context of yourself dealing with threats abroad from countries that are now peer competitors to the US. I think Donald Trump got a wake-up call. I don't know whether or not he was being honest in his assessment, like meaning if he was incompetent or he knew better and was just being dishonest in his assessment of what was taking place in Ukraine. When he comes out, yeah, a million Russians have died. Okay, not him. Not him. That's nonsense. He has to know that there is no way to escalate in this, that Joe Biden shat the bed, and that there is nowhere else for him to go with this short of escalating to the point of something that may end up into a direct conflict with the US. Trump has said he doesn't necessarily want a war. Okay, fair enough. If that's the case, you have no way to control or push Russia. You're losing on the battlefield. You don't have any more weapons that you could send, not in any real terms. And for all intents and purposes, if you put troops on the ground, those troops are going to be a target. So what do? Scott could be right that the objective of all this is let Ukraine down the vine. Let them weaken, let their military scream, and let them get to the point where they collapse, where the US could come in order to exert more influence on Ukraine, or for that matter, Europe. I guess my feeling is, I don't know why you would need to do that, but truth be told, it will be like turning on a dime to go from we're with you for as long as it takes to, okay, now we're forcing you to end the war. I suppose you could, because of all the money and everything that you're investing into it. You have a huge amount of control over the process. But is it easier to let them collapse first? It's easier to let them collapse first. I don't know, it's fascinating. It is fascinating. I'm sorry, that's a lot of wood to chop. Borg, you know what it is? I know for myself, when I'm playing a chess game, when I'm behind in that game, or I feel like I'm at a disadvantage in the game, I am stronger at weaker positions, if that makes sense. Meaning if there's a chance that I can hold a position when I was playing all the time, when I was playing well, I was very good at holding those positions, and not just holding those positions, finding advantages in those positions, because on some level you had to. Otherwise, your position was going to go up in smoke. If you're talking about Russia, China, India, some of these other countries, they don't have a choice but to be competent. If they are incompetent, or if they're running their government in a way, they're dealing with a peer competitor in the US. And in dealing with a dangerous competitor, it focuses the mind on some level. So, at the point where the US is like, well, we're going to keep this horse in the barn in regards to China, whether it's dealing with economics, or whether it's dealing with like chips, or whether it's dealing with AI. Okay, well, you have to figure out a way to get out of that. You can't allow yourself to be put in a corner like that. If I put a gun in space, you're going to have to put a gun in space in order to just keep some kind of balance. And so the moment that the US is trying to do this kind of AI race, China, by definition, is forced to do it also. It's going to be their way with any kind of weapon system. Even hypersonic missiles, with the US investing a huge amount of money in the hypersonic missiles to balance the fact that Russia, China, and if I'm not mistaken, even Iran have access to hypersonic missiles. I hope you get my point. China didn't have a choice. There was no way they could allow themselves to fall behind this kind of quote unquote AI race, especially since AI and the capabilities of AI into the future are going to be somewhat unpredictable, especially in regards to military conflict. Like, imagine having a series of drones that are all under one AI control with a very specific objective of doing X or Y. And so you might have 30 different drones in a swarm doing X or Y. Or imagine doing the same thing in the water, where you have all of these boats that are under one intelligence with a very specific objective in mind, where you tell it the objective and it goes and does the objective. That stuff's terrifying. Imagine having these kind of little bee type AI bots that are flying, that if you just looked at it in passing, you would think it was just a bug or insect, where in reality, it is this kind of surveillance piece of equipment or something like that that's working under a singular intelligence. The AI thing is revolutionary, not just in everyday living, but also in the issue of war and peace. China didn't have a choice. My point is, China didn't have a choice. We just said the Borg. Ellie JJ can't type in super chat. Read my comment, Jamal. Let's see. Where's your comment, Ellie? Keep in mind, Ellie, from my point of view, these things run through like nobody's business. It's just like, bloop, bloop, bloop. Let's see. Where's your comment, Ellie? Where's your comment? Ellie, there's no way I can go back and find that comment. There are too many. You know what's wild? When I looked at that, I thought I saw my name, Jamal Thomas. I was like, that rat bastard on Twitter is now on my... Okay, it's not the case. Can't type in super chat. Read comment, Jamal. Thank you. Ellie, I will try to find that comment. But if you can, just put it again. I'll read it. Ratso B. Harris, welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. And this one is Y'all Borgen. The YouTube short titled What I'd Say I Was on. What? Do YouTube shorts titled What I'd Say If I Was on X? I don't get that. I don't understand, Borgen. Do YouTube shorts. Oh, I see. Do a YouTube short titled What I'd Say If I Was on X. Yeah, but that doesn't give my account back. I want my account back. It's not so much, look, it's not that I want to be on Twitter because I just want to pop off. I just want to be a dick to people. It's not that. I use it to organize my my life. And the people who I, let's say, communicate with, there's certain people who I only communicate with on Twitter. And so that stuff gets gutted. Not to mention, it is very creepy that somebody is molesting your account like this. It's like, what are you doing? I'm going to get my account back and it's going to be a bunch of dick pics. Like, that's not, it's not the most conducive. It doesn't necessarily make me feel most comfortable. It's like, yeah, stick to your guns, man. What do you stick to my guns? I just want my account. All right. I am going to end this. Ellie, I swear I'm looking for your comment and I don't see it. Ellie, next time when you get the chance, just write it out, because I have no way to find it. I mean, from my point of view, these things are just rolling by really quick. All right, I'm going to call this a day. I'm going to say like it, share it, subscribe to it. If you dig it and you find yourself coming back here often, you can always support through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats. You can always buy me a cup of coffee, in which I deeply appreciate you doing so. You can also be a member of this channel, The Jamal Thomas Show. I am going to start getting t-shirts. I need to get t-shirts because I want to have raffles. At the very least for members, where I have a raffle once a month or something like that. That'd be cool. I hope you guys are doing it right. I'll see you tomorrow morning, Friday morning, bright and early. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 87. Signing off. Have a good one all.